An ice age has arrived in the world. Temperatures are plummeting across the globe, and a news reporter, trying to lift people's spirits, urged them not to give up. The government does not forget about its citizens, and this gives hope that they will be able to survive the crisis by supporting each other. The news reporter was about to say something important, but he was completely unaware of the plane flying above him. The news broadcast was interrupted at the most inopportune moment. The young girl called out to Han Feng. The protagonist, exhausted from constant cold and hunger, slowly made his way to the door to find out who had come to see him. Through the peephole, he saw a familiar blonde who always evoked warm feelings in him. Opening the door, the guy asked Hyuna in surprise why she had come to him in such terrible cold. He insistently asked the young girl to come into the apartment, as it was quite dangerous and cold outside. Suddenly, Hyuna pulled the protagonist towards her and kissed him passionately, as if wanting to warm him with her warmth. The blonde pulled away only when the air in her lungs became catastrophically short. Han Feng was stunned and asked Hyuna what had suddenly come over her, since they hadn't seen each other for so long. The girl replied that she simply realized that she loved only him. What was happening opened Hyuna's eyes, and now the beauty understood that happiness was only possible next to Han Feng. The heroine was ready to do anything for the guy to allow her to stay with him forever. Upon hearing this confession, the protagonist's cheeks immediately turned red with embarrassment, and obscene thoughts began to arise in his head. Hyuna could hardly imagine how much her words meant to Han Feng now, and how they touched his heart. The young girl quietly asked the guy to simply close his eyes and surrender to the feelings that were enveloping them both. The hero did just that, not feeling any danger at all and trusting his emotions. A man with a club in his hands immediately appeared from around the corner and swung at the main character with clear intent. Hyuna was afraid that her beloved might get hurt, but the guy explained to her that they cannot feed it to other people. But now they can find out what this fool was hiding in his stash. If they calculate everything correctly, they will be able to survive until help arrives. The main character was still alive and felt exhausted after all the experiences and trials. He tried to move his hand, but his body wouldn't obey, and now Han Feng understood what it felt like to be close to death. From his half-opened eyelids, the hero noticed the traitors, who were flirting with each other and huddled in a dark corner of the room. This vile, cold-blooded woman cruelly betrayed his trust. If Han Feng had a second life, he would never run after her and endure her betrayal again. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed a bright golden clod of light and reached out to it with his hand in hope of salvation. Perhaps right now he is going to heaven, leaving this cold world forever and finding peace. But suddenly, Han Feng's hand was engulfed in a red light, and then he himself was completely engulfed in that glow. The protagonist jumped up suddenly in surprise, breathing heavily and looking around in bewilderment. Looking around, Han Feng realized that he was in his own room. He immediately felt warmth. The protagonist had already forgotten this feeling after long months of cold and suffering. Han Feng looked at the calendar. June 28th. The end of the world was supposed to occur on the 15th of next month. The hero went back in time just 2 weeks before the apocalypse. But there is one very strange amendment. Every time since waking up, Han Feng's right hand has been glowing with a bright red light. It doesn't hurt. There are no unpleasant sensations. His nose began to itch violently from the dust in the room, so Han Feng sneezed loudly. His hand immediately began to be enveloped in a green light, and he felt strange and couldn't understand what was happening. And suddenly the glow around Han Feng became even stronger. The protagonist is now emitting a multicolored glow from his hand, and he is curious how science is going to explain it. The glow has become less intense, which means we can conclude that it is unstable and constantly changing, not at all like the bright red glow. And then suddenly, Han Feng felt a sudden wave of fatigue, as if all his strength had left him in an instant. The guy started shaking his hand up and down, not understanding what kind of thing it was or what to do with it next. An absurd thought came to his mind. What if he was now in some kind of comic book where everything happens outside the rules of reality? Han Feng grabbed the table knife, hoping that his actions would help him figure out the mysterious glow. The protagonist of any such story always has some kind of inappropriately strong ability after reincarnation that he must discover. However, there was no reaction, and he felt even more confused and alone in this world. His stomach began to rumble traitorously, reminding Han Feng that he was hungry and needed food to restore his strength. And the refrigerator was empty. Even a mouse would have hanged itself from such desolation and lack of food in the house. It was very bad. The main character began to feel like he was about to lose consciousness from hunger and fatigue. Luck smiled on Han Feng. He saw a can of soybeans on the table. These were tasty treats that wouldn't be found in a post-apocalyptic world, and they weren't enough to make a full meal, but they would do for satisfying hunger right now. The protagonist reached out with his glowing hand for the bean, and then, without thinking for long, he threw it into his mouth, enjoying the moment. Suddenly, as if in response to his actions, the small bean exploded, breaking the silence around into a multitude of small sounds. A whole bean plant started to stick out of Han Feng's mouth, and he was shocked by what happened to him. The protagonist, feeling a mixture of surprise and disgust, carefully removed the stem and root from his mouth. The young man was at a loss as to where the beans could have gone, as he had only held them in his hands and could not understand what was happening. Han Feng was even more surprised by the fact that his fatigue had completely disappeared, as if the beans had restored his energy. Well, and the green light too. Perhaps it is somehow connected with this plant and its amazing properties. The main character broke off one pod. Inside, surprisingly, were beans that looked fresh and juicy, as if they had just been picked from the field. Could this be the ability the protagonist had acquired? Han Feng wanted to know more about it and its capabilities. But now there are more important things to do. We need to urgently stock up on food, since the apocalypse is already very close and there is little time left. Let's restore the order of events. At first the light was red, then it changed to green, which became larger and smaller. The guy touched the soybeans with his glowing hand, and they turned into a full-fledged plant right before his eyes. But Han Feng still couldn't figure out what kind of ability this was. The protagonist turned around when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. It was Hyuna, who asked the guy with a smile if he had also decided to go grocery shopping. This coincidence is amazing, and perhaps it is even a trick of fate or just an accident in this strange world. The protagonist shuddered when he saw the insidious woman. Han Feng had been dreaming about her for 3 years already, and in the past, he had done everything possible just to make her happy with his attention. Although the young man understood perfectly well that for her, he was just a backup airfield, and nothing more. But Han Feng would never have thought that he would kill him or betray him. Now is not the time for revenge. First, we must prepare for the end of the world, and find a way to survive in the new conditions. Meanwhile, Hyuna approached the main character, and waving her hand in front of his face, asked why he was hanging there and staring at one point. Han Feng apologized and explained that she was so beautiful today that he was completely speechless from her charm. The beauty laughed sweetly and asked since when he became such a romantic. She was pleased to hear it from him, since they had met so fortunately in the city center. The girl suggested that they both go shopping and choose something interesting. Han Feng apologized, explaining that he couldn't, and simply walked past, lost in his thoughts. Hyuna clearly didn't expect to be rejected, because up until that moment, this guy had always agreed to spend time with her and give her attention. But the main character has had enough. He refuses to be her wallet on legs, always ready to fulfill her whims and desires. Han Feng went to the largest store in the entire eastern region of his city to stock up on supplies. When the Ice Age came, the entire store was emptied overnight. So now the young man is in dire need of buying as much as possible before the apocalypse, which is just around the corner. But to survive, you need a lot of things: food, winter clothing, medicine, all sorts of little things, fuel, and much more. However, Han Feng didn't have the money for all this. The question arises, how was he supposed to manage to buy all of this if his budget was limited to the limit and did not allow for unnecessary spending? At that very moment, the main character received a message on his phone from the bank with important information about his finances. The loan agency notified Han Feng that his credit assessment had been completed and a loan was now available to him. It dawned on the protagonist how he could have forgotten about this important circumstance in his life and missed such an opportunity. Han Feng immediately began downloading a bunch of different apps to get a loan and quickly process it. Getting into debt is the easiest thing to do, and the best thing is that you won't have to pay it back. The end of the world is coming any day now. Hyuna was furious that this jerk dared to deny her such a simple wish to spend time together and have fun. This dumb loser doesn't even have his own car, which means if he writes to her again, the blonde will simply send him away without further ado. Suddenly, an expensive car with shiny wheels and a powerful engine stopped next to the beauty, attracting attention. Han Feng looked out from the lowered window with a confident smile, as if he was the owner of this luxury car. A look of surprise appeared on Hyuna's face. She didn't expect to see Han Feng driving such a cool car in such an unexpected situation. The guy came outside and said that he had just bought himself a car. The father's business in the States was doing well, so he suddenly decided to please his child. Han Feng just took him to the airport. Now the beauty understood what the matter was. Hyuna was already beginning to think that the guy had simply decided to dump her because their meeting had been cold before. Han Feng pulled the blonde closer to him and asked in a serious tone how he could live without her. The blonde shyly replied to Han Feng that he was very important to her, and suggested having dinner together and then watching a movie. Having finished saying all this, the young girl discovered that the guy had disappeared. Han Feng loaded the box into the car and apologized to the blonde, as he still had a lot of things to do. Hyuna didn't understand why he needed so many boxes, and the guy explained that he just needed all these things. As if by chance, Han Feng remembered that he had a gift for the blonde, which he would give to her a little later. Hyuna promised that she would look forward to it. But now it was time for her to go home. A sly grin appeared on his face. Everything was going like clockwork. The protagonist chuckled. It would be best if Hyuna didn't know about his warehouse. This warehouse is the key to his survival, and the rope that holds the young man over the abyss. When the end of the world comes, the impudent woman will get what she deserves. Or rather, both of them. Especially the guy who killed him. It was hard to believe, but the main character was already expecting the apocalypse. July 15th, the day it all began. A snowstorm and a drop in temperature to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Over the next month, temperatures will continue to drop to minus 70, and snow and ice will cover the entire world. This means there should be more food. Canned goods are the best bet. The boxes should be sealed so that the neighbors don't suspect anything. Hanfen decided to carry all the fragile supplies himself at night, when no one was looking. There will be no electricity, so the main character bought himself a generator, and of course, fuel. When the apocalypse begins, there will be no heating. Then Hanfeng will transfer his home to separate heating, and at the same time strengthen the windows and doors. Allocate a separate room for resources. Hanfeng finished all of this only on July 14th, one day before the first drop in temperature began. And now comes the most interesting part. It is necessary to study the strange abilities that the main character has begun to possess. To survive the coming ice age, reserves alone would clearly not be enough, and this was perfectly clear to everyone. The ability to control plants became Hanfeng's only hope. The main character grew all these beans in the plate using his ability, but some suspicions were still present. This ability was somewhat fickle and capricious, and Hanfeng never figured out how to precisely trigger and control it. The time had come to try them, and the protagonist really hoped that these beans would be edible and would not cause any reaction in his stomach. They were quite edible, and now Hanfeng knew that he could create his own food even when resources were scarce. But the most difficult part remains. We need to figure out exactly how to do this. So far, Hanfeng has only tried this with beans. So the young man became curious to see if it would work with other plants, so he decisively opened the refrigerator. He conducted experiments until the evening, immersing himself in the world of his discoveries and trying not to miss a single detail. As a result, Hanfen lost consciousness due to excessive stress and fatigue after long experiments. As soon as the protagonist came to his senses, he felt his head was splitting, and there was complete disorder and chaos all around. It seems that the ability hits the brain and body very hard. But still, the guy managed to find out something about his abilities. Before passing out, Hanfeng tried using his ability on different plants. Some of them did not respond to his efforts, but some grew just like beans, surprising him with their size and speed of growth. Others simply exploded with a deafening crash, leaving behind only clouds of smoke. After the explosion, they turned into very light coals, and the main character had absolutely no idea what this strange thing was. These coals could be used to warm oneself well during the cold days of the Ice Age, which was an important discovery for survival. Now Hanfeng will definitely not freeze in his shelter during severe frosts and cold nights. The protagonist tried again and again, never giving up in the face of difficulties and the unpredictable results of his experiments. He even tried to concentrate and focus on his breathing, hoping that he could do it this time. Finally, the broccoli attempt was a success. However, Hanfeng immediately felt a strong weakness throughout his body and complete exhaustion, so he instantly lost consciousness. As a result, Hanfeng was unable to find a clear pattern in his experiments, but he did gain at least a minimal understanding of how to activate this unique ability, which gave him confidence. The key was in his subconscious. Imagining himself in the wilderness, in the middle of nature, where the hero's soul merges with the wild world, he felt himself one with the environment. Hanfeng could summon his ability as if it were a part of himself, hidden deep within his soul. The protagonist decided to experiment with meat, hoping that this would lead to new discoveries and an understanding of his powers. There was no reaction, so the guy put forward a theory that the skill only works on plants. But he did not lose hope, because how could one possibly live in a world without meat, which had always been an important part of his diet? No matter how hard the protagonist tried, nothing worked, and he felt increasingly frustrated in his attempts. Here Hanfeng realized that during meditation he felt two different energies, and he had not yet tried the red one. So the hero decided to concentrate once again and try to call up the red light. Suddenly the meat began to glow red, and the next moment it turned into something ugly, causing the protagonist to feel disgust and anger at himself for his failure. This made the main character angry, and he threw the abomination onto the floor with all his might. The meat reacted to the red light, unlike the green, but to the touch it seemed to be simply cooked. Was the red light simply warming, and that was all it could do to this piece of meat? Hanfeng wondered. However, the guy knew that everything was much more complicated than it seemed at first glance, and he still had many questions for himself regarding his powers. The meat in his hands seemed to be disintegrating into small particles, and for now the protagonist could not clearly explain why this was happening. It suddenly dawned on the young man that perhaps he should try combining his abilities, Green light represents the amazing evolution of matter, and red light is its rapid decay. The protagonist, realizing this, decided to check what would happen if he suddenly tried to combine them and grabbed the meat with both hands. At that very moment, the meat, as if by magic, became significantly larger. But Han Feng didn't understand where the beans had gone, so he assumed that they might have merged with the meat. It was amazing. The meat looks, feels, and even smells like the real thing. Therefore, the protagonist enthusiastically decided to try again, hoping to repeat the success of his experiment. However, no matter how hard Han Feng tried to repeat his experiment, he couldn't do anything else, which made him frustrated. In other words, he has yet to understand the principle of his abilities. Even despite all this, the day turned out to be quite productive. A sly smile appeared on the protagonist's lips. If he can fully comprehend this power, then after the end of the world, he will find himself on top of the world, in front of all other people. Han Feng suddenly realized that he had absolutely no means of self-defense to survive in this dangerous world. You urgently need to find a gun before the apocalypse begins to ensure your safety in the chaos. The main character looked out the window and noticed falling snowflakes. Since the cold had come, it meant the end of the world was inexorably approaching. Within a week, the temperature will drop to -45 degrees, so the hero needs to find a cannon as quickly as possible. But where will Han Feng find her, since buying weapons is prohibited and the hero has no connections for this matter? And then the hero noticed a familiar guy who was bragging that the famous Lao Wang from Zigan was his brother and friend. He, dressed in expensive clothes and with a smug grin on his face, offered his interlocutor a smoke. And then, with a smirk on his face, he asked them not to be shy and to relax in his company. Everyone calls this guy Bro Lee. He lives in the same region as the main character and is always up to some kind of mischief. Everyone here knows him, and if something happens, they always ask for help, because he can't refuse his friends. This guy doesn't have a job, but he constantly puts on airs, creating the illusion of being busy and important. The protagonist assumed that this guy must have at least some connections that would help him get a weapon. The blonde looked at the hero in bewilderment when he called out to him and exclaimed that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, causing confusion. Han Feng tried to put on a welcoming smile and waved his hand, hoping to create an atmosphere of friendship and trust. Bro Lee raised an eyebrow and asked if they knew each other. The main character lied that they had just met recently, and the blonde believed him, deciding that it had simply slipped his mind. Han Feng approached the hero and whispered in his ear that he had some business here, and said that he needed weapons. Li Zi sternly stated that they were not involved in any illegal activities, and the gun was a serious matter. The protagonist explained to his brother Li that he had misunderstood everything. He simply found himself in a situation where he needed a weapon for self-defense. Han Feng made up a story about how he was recently riding his bike to work, and an old man who kept spitting passed by. As a result, it hit the hero right in the face, leaving him in complete shock from such impudent behavior. Han Feng immediately indignantly asked why he did this, and this impudent man, instead of explaining, spat again. Therefore, the hero taught the impudent man a good lesson, deciding to show him that this is not the way to act, and that he must respect other people. The man promised Han Feng that he would definitely regret it, and his words sounded threatening and ominous. And the next day, his buddies caught the main character near work and beat him up, leaving him humiliated. It was terrible, so now Han Feng needed at least some kind of weapon for his safety. The fictitious story left Bro Lee with strong emotions. He was outraged that some jerk dared to spit on his friend. Apparently, the blonde didn't quite understand the story. Li Zi promised the protagonist that he would call his boss right now, and they would definitely get a weapon. The blonde man suggested taking the bus because his Panamera was currently being repaired. Han Feng asked not to worry about it, because he himself was on wheels, and they would be able to quickly reach the desired point. The kid was clearly living well, and once Li Zi learned that the car cost 700,000, his opinion of Han Feng only improved. After taking another photo in an expensive salon, Bro Lee said that at the next intersection, you need to turn left. Just last night it was still summer, and they were enjoying the warm air. An expensive car stopped in front of the building, and the men sitting around the fire on the street immediately turned their attention to it. Upon seeing Li Zi, they immediately rushed over to him, and the blonde man casually said that he had come to see the boss. Bro Lee bragged that he got this new Tiger for only 700,000 pieces. This kid was now showing off as if the real owner of this car wasn't standing next to him. Boss Liu asked Lee with displeasure why he had come to him at such a time, since he had his own affairs and concerns. The blonde explained that his dear brother wanted to buy something. He desperately needed a gun to protect himself from trouble. The request seemed trivial to the boss. He thought that Lee had brought him something interesting and worthy of attention. They immediately threw a pistol on the table and named the sum of 6,000 rubles, as if this was a common thing for them. But the main character said that he would actually really like to get something longer, and definitely with a sight, so that you can shoot accurately if necessary and not miss. Boss Liu exclaimed indignantly. Did he really need a sniper rifle if the boy was making such unreasonable demands? He is not in the store now, so he can choose either the gun or get out of his office without any questions. Broly tried to smooth things over and decided to tell his boss a fictitious situation that happened to the main character. By doing this, he hoped to gain sympathy and understanding from Boss Liu. By the end of the story, the leader was furious, because how could he lie about 3 children, who, moreover, were not all Han Feng's? Li was clearly a master at making up stories, but sometimes he went a bit overboard. The boss promised that they would definitely get a sniper rifle. They would just have to wait a couple of days. He ordered Zhang Zi to organize everything and try to find a semi-automatic device. And then he handed the main character a pistol as a gift, which was supposed to become a symbol of trust and support between them. Han Feng decided to advise stocking up on supplies, since according to information from his friend in the government, there would soon be a shortage of everything. The boss looked closely at the boy's serious face, realizing that he was not speaking for nothing. Realizing that he was not lying, he promised to do so, because trust between them was an important factor in their affairs. On the way home, Broly admitted that if the boss hadn't agreed to help, he would have gotten the gun himself. But if Han Fen suddenly wants to thank him, he can buy 7 or 8 blocks of Huazi. Now the protagonist had supplies and weapons. All that was left was to pay attention to his abilities and understand their specifics. Without noticing the steps at all, the main character slipped and fell to the ground. He immediately felt a sharp pain in his leg, which he apparently managed to break due to carelessness. Han Feng handed the keys to Brother Li and asked him to take him to the hospital to get the necessary medical attention. The blonde man replied guiltily that he didn't have a license, and without one it was forbidden to drive on the roads. However, Broly asked him not to pee, since they would get there in no time on foot. The main character refused, and they called a taxi. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the young head nurse looked out the window and realized that the snowstorm was starting to intensify. The phone rang, and the girl was immediately called to the main hall to help with the emergency. As a result, the main character ended up with a really serious fracture of the tibia, right before the end of the world. The doctor asked the young man to wait outside while he prepared the necessary medicines. Broly said he had one more important thing to do, and asked me to be sure to call him if I needed his help again. Due to the cold weather, the number of accidents increased, and the entire emergency room was overwhelmed with victims. The main character didn't understand when they would finally give him the medicine, and then his attention was drawn to one girl who was quickly moving along the corridor, helping everyone who needed help. Head nurse Jing assisted the wounded, gave advice to the injured, and gave instructions to the rest of the hospital staff. The main character was surprised, because this girl was so young, and she had already become a senior nurse. She was clearly talented, and she treated her patients very well, which inspired confidence in everyone around her. And this heroine was also quite beautiful. Her smile could melt even the coldest heart. All sorts of obscene thoughts began to creep into his head, but the main character understood perfectly well that he couldn't think like that. The man sitting next to him called out to the head nurse, and she immediately turned her attention to him. The girl approached him and apologized, as everyone was busy at the moment, but promised to serve the gentleman a little later when she was free. As if by chance, the old man slipped his phone with the camera on under the nurse's skirt, and said that his side had suddenly started to hurt. The beauty apologized and replied that, unfortunately, she would not be able to make a conclusion, since an X-ray was necessary. But the man did not give up, and persistently asked the head nurse to examine him. He stood up and grabbed the beauty around the waist, showing where on his body it hurt right now, causing bewilderment in everyone around. The girl felt very ticklish from his touch, and through tears, she asked the patient to wait for the attending physician. However, the old man grabbed the beauty by the buttock and replied that he had not yet reached the most interesting moment. A sharp bang resounded in the air, and everything stopped suddenly, leaving everyone in shock from the incident. The old man fell to the floor with a look of surprise on his face, and the head nurse asked the patient in fear if he was okay. Han Feng apologized, and explained guiltily that it was his first time using crutches, and therefore he had not yet learned how to move properly. He reached out to the man's phone to make sure it wasn't broken, but the old man shouted threateningly that he should not touch his personal things and not interfere in his affairs. However, the protagonist did not listen to him, and continued to act at his own discretion, understanding the need for intervention. As he thought, this brave guy decided to harass the nurses in the hospital and even take pictures of them without their consent. Now he better hurry up and get out of here as quickly as possible before the security themselves throw him out for inappropriate behavior. The protagonist promised that if he ever saw the old man doing something like that again, he would definitely expose him on the internet. The man cursed under his breath and ran away in panic. The head nurse was very surprised by the fact that the patient himself said that his side hurt, and did not notice the old man's meanness. Han Fen was taken aback by her naivety and decided to explain to the girl the truth, that this pervert had just taken a photo under her skirt. The guy handed the nurse the phone and heroically asked her to be more careful in the future. There were plenty of perverts in their time. The beauty, with a slight smile on her lips, thanked her savior, and noticed that his leg was seriously injured. As a sign of sincere gratitude, she readily offered her help. The main character thanked the head nurse. The heroine promised the guy that she would never let bad guys go unpunished again. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the young man's leg was accidentally touching her chest, absorbed in her care for him. A nurse entered the room and asked her senior colleague to approach a patient who urgently needed first aid. The pink-haired nurse said goodbye to the patient and asked him not to forget that he would need to come back in a week for a bandage change. She left the room, and a slight smile appeared on Han Feng's lips from the pleasant memories of meeting her. The protagonist mentally said goodbye to the beauty and left the clinic. The next day, breaking news broadcasts announced that heavy snowfall and cold weather were expected in all regions of the country. According to news reports from foreign journalists, sharp temperature fluctuations are being observed all over the world. However, experts said that such an unusually strong cold snap will not last long and will not have serious consequences. The main thing is not to panic and not spread rumors, because this catastrophe will definitely pass soon and everything will get better. Han Feng let out a tired sigh, realizing that these bigwigs always hide the true state of affairs by using false information. If the hero had not died one day, he would have believed it too. Han Feng was well prepared for all possible difficulties, which meant he didn't have to worry about the future. A message arrived on the phone in a group of residents of the complex, where neighbors had already begun to talk loudly about the weather anomaly. An undercover police officer reported that this was no ordinary snowstorm, but that an ice age was about to arrive with its consequences. Han Feng raised an eyebrow in confusion, wondering who this person was and how he knew about the end of the world. It seems like this is the account the protagonist needs to pay attention to in order to stay informed about what's going on around him. Meanwhile, the chat conversation continued, growing with each message and drawing more and more participants into the discussion. It became like the animal world, where everyone wanted to learn something new and believed that their question was the most important one right now. One of the residents wanted to know where the management company representatives were now and when they would help. They, in turn, tried to explain to the respected residents that there was very heavy snow right now, so they could not help. Then many began to demand that the management company immediately return the money for services that they were unable to provide. It all started with the management company's inability to clear the snow near the house, but now their arguments looked rather stupid. Another person joined the discussion and tried to calm the tension. He explained to all the participants in the conversation that even if the snow was cleared, literally in a few hours everything would be covered in snow again. Instead of arguing, it's better to go out together and try to remove all the snow. The remaining residents began to complain and express dissatisfaction with the snow removal situation near their building. Just now, Zhang Xueyu was merely stating the facts. The hero added that in this situation, there is no point in taking out anger on the managers, since they will not get the desired result. Going to the store was out of the question, so Zhang Xueyu suggested walking, but first helping the managers clear the snow. The protagonist suddenly realized that he was starting to remember this Zhang Xueyu. I remember before his reincarnation, this guy was always active and not afraid to take responsibility for others. At this point, another resident of the building appeared online, clearly unhappy with the current snow removal situation. He angrily asked everyone who wanted to go shovel snow and the rest to just shut their mouths. It was time for them to get to work and not just chatter, as the snow continued to fall, making it difficult to move around the yard. The tenant of the house left the network as quickly as he entered. Then one of the chat participants was the first to volunteer to come down and help, as he still had dozens of new topics to discuss with his brother. This voice and manner of speech seemed familiar to Han Feng. Following this, the tenant began to agree. Almost everyone took the initiative, even the head nurse from the clinic, whom the main character had met before. Hyuna also decided to help, even though she had been sick for the last few days. But Brother Jiang set a good example for her. Han Feng even felt funny that she actually wanted to go outside in such weather with the snowstorm and cold. The guys immediately replied to Hyuna that they, as real men, could not let a fragile girl work in such conditions. The heroine thanked them for their concern and wished everyone a good time without her. Han Feng cursed in irritation, realizing that the situation was becoming more and more absurd with each new message in the chat. Then he received a message from Hyuna in his private chat, where the girl invited him to come to her, as she was already waiting for him impatiently. But before going to see her, the girl asked him to go to the supermarket and buy more food for their meeting. And then she sent a photo of herself sitting on the bed and waiting for Han Feng. Even in such weather, Hyuna tried to seduce the young man practically naked, but this task would cost him dearly. The protagonist decided to think about how to respond to her persistent invitation and how best to act in this situation. He immediately came up with a good idea about how to combine business with pleasure. Today was already the third day of the apocalypse, The temperature outside was minus 20 degrees Celsius, and everything around was frozen. In the first days, the heating system worked. There was even internet, which meant that everyday life continued within its limits. I have to watch videos on my phone screen to pass the time while waiting for the weather to improve and for news. It was only on the third day that Han Feng became bored. It seemed that the biggest problem of the apocalypse was loneliness. The leg is also far from being in the best condition, so Han Feng decided to continue watching the videos. After doctors stitched up the wounds of a man who jumped from the 15th floor, they found that his bones had begun to heal. Han Feng chuckled to himself. How could he not have guessed that his abilities might be related to this? The protagonist's hand began to glow with a bright green light again, and then he placed it on his sore leg, hoping for a miracle. However, there was no reaction. Han Feng realized that he had probably simply imagined that the green light could heal wounds. The young man immediately began to feel sleepy, and then he plunged into a dreamless world, where he rode on a huge lamb at the head of a herd, enjoying freedom. The beast reared up and threw Han Feng off, as if it was playing with him, unaware of its own strength. The protagonist fell to the ground, and his leg began to burn terribly, causing him to wince in pain and bewilderment. A goat came up to him and began to lick the reddened area. Han Feng immediately pushed her away from him, causing an expression of indignation and displeasure to appear on the animal's face. She wrapped her amazingly long tongue around the young man's leg. Then she raised her head and pulled Han Feng, as if inviting him to follow her on a new adventure. And suddenly her tongue, wrapped around the protagonist's wounded leg, began to glow with a familiar green light. Han Feng jumped up from the sofa, waking up from his sleep. He tried to catch his breath after a bad dream that left a strange feeling of anxiety in his soul. The protagonist was taken aback as soon as he noticed that his leg was still slightly glowing green, as if reminding him of what had happened. The young man untied all the bandages, got up from the sofa, and happily realized that his leg was completely fine and did not hurt. Perhaps the green light healed her while he slept. Taking a table knife in his hand, the protagonist decided to test his theory about the healing properties of light. My hands were shaking from excitement and fear. I was afraid to make an incision on myself and risk my health. As a result, the main character only decided to slightly cut his index finger. And then he used his ability again, hoping that the miracle would repeat itself and help him again. A sly smile appeared on the protagonist's lips, as he felt a surge of strength and self-confidence. At this very time, residents on the street were actively clearing away the fallen snow to clear a path for themselves to move. Zhang Xueyu thanked Uncle Liu for helping him on such a difficult snowy day. The man replied that it was all thanks to the brothers from the Wang family, who were always ready to help. Wang Xiaowu and Wang Xiaowen waved to everyone around them, enjoying the friendly communication and teamwork. Then, suddenly, a young girl next to them slipped and fell to the ground, attracting the attention of everyone present. The twins immediately ran up to the beauty to help her up and advised her to be more careful next time. Jing Shu, with a wide and sincere smile on her face, replied that she was completely fine and sincerely thanked him for the help provided. The guys replied that in that case they would go and clear the main road, and if the girl needed help, she could contact them. The snowfall is getting heavier, and people need to hurry. Suddenly, Liu Guangyao remembered something that was related to the recent events in their area. However, he considered this not so important as to distract everyone from current affairs and concerns. The man just recently heard that there was a guy living next door who transported a bunch of different things in a pickup truck every day. Zhang Xueyu guessed that the man had simply moved and was most likely settling into his new apartment. However, Luo Guangyao saw gas cylinders and a fireplace, and this did not look like a normal move like most other moves. More suited to preparing for the apocalypse, which everyone has been talking about so often in recent months. The Wang brothers approached their uncle and told him the good news that the road was finally cleared. Liu Guangyao praised the guys for their excellent work and the effort they put into this matter. At this point, another person intervened in the conversation, but a lump of snow immediately hit him on the back of the head, distracting him from his thoughts and causing laughter from those around him. Luo Yan asked Wu Kuanyu to stop slacking off and finally start working properly like everyone else. The hero immediately began to get indignant, since in his opinion, he did almost all the work, unlike the girl, who only chatted. Zhang Xueyu asked the boys not to quarrel, since the main road had already been cleared, and now there was no need to worry about moving. He allowed the boys to take a break and get ready for going to the supermarket. Hearing this, Jing Sui was happy and smiled. The brothers knew that their family needed to buy a lot of things in case of bad weather. Liu Guangyao decided to ask Zhang Xueyu what he thought about the connection with the natural disaster happening around them. The hero in glasses admitted honestly that, to be honest, this doesn't particularly bother him or worry him at the moment. This is just an ordinary snowstorm, which will definitely end soon, and everything will be the same as it was before. Even if the disaster doesn't end, isn't it good that someone has plenty of supplies in the house in case of need? Liu Guangyao agreed with the boy's words. Although he was still too young, his head was already thinking clearly. Zhang Shuiyu asked all the residents to line up and not push each other. The snowstorm was getting worse, and they needed to try to get everything done in 3 hours. The protagonist woke up as soon as he heard a knock on his door, and a voice telling him to open the door immediately without delay. Han Feng did so without further ado, and then apologized to Brother Li for oversleeping. As the protagonist had ordered earlier, Li Zi managed to get a semi-automatic rifle for protection in case of any trouble. Brother Liu thanked Han Feng from the bottom of his heart for advising him to prepare food and necessary supplies in advance. The blonde sighed heavily, and the protagonist noticed how his friend was clearly worried about the current weather situation. Li Zi said the store in the Eastern District was completely empty after they cleared the road and quickly went there. As in the past, events repeated themselves. Bro Li said that it was time for him to go and asked his bro to dress warmly so as not to freeze in such harsh weather. The protagonist returned to his apartment, where silence and a feeling of comfort awaited him, despite the storm outside the window. He still couldn't understand how people had managed to take out an entire supermarket overnight. In the comics and novels he had read before, only people with superpowers could do this, sucking everything into space. Do they really exist? And could there be ordinary people with extraordinary talents among them? The main character clenched his hand into a fist, which made him wary. You need to study your abilities more carefully, so that when you meet other people, you can take adequate countermeasures. It is currently known that Han Feng's ability can react with various products. But the chances of success are slim, with soybeans only 1 in 10, and with meat the chances are even smaller for unknown reasons. And the main character did not understand at all why this was happening. The bean in his hand suddenly exploded, frightening the young man and causing him to think about the consequences of his experiments. He had something in his hands that he didn't understand. The percentage of success was really negligible, and this made him worry. Therefore, Han Feng firmly decided for himself that today he must definitely sort everything out. The clock showed 22:45. After so many hours, perhaps the protagonist has figured out what's what, and how to use his abilities most effectively. It turned out that the energy of the green light was not constant when used, and this created additional difficulties for the experiment. All products have different energy values, which significantly complicated the process of interacting with them. When everything goes wrong, the protagonist fails. The scale in the previous frame seemed quite familiar to the main character. And then Han Feng remembered. This was the same online music game that was popular 10 years ago among teenagers. If we assume that a certain amount of energy is comparable to the direction of movement in the game, that might help him figure it out. Then the values of energy input per second must be correct in order to achieve the peak efficiency of your actions. Having realized this, Han Feng began to achieve what had previously seemed impossible and unattainable for him. Now it's time to experiment with meat. It's different with him. If something goes wrong, it turns into some kind of nasty black liquid with a terrible smell. The principle with green light should be similar. You need to find the right balance and approach for each product. First, you need to determine the amount of energy required to successfully interact with meat or other products. But it seemed to take much longer than with plant foods, which puzzled him. Han Feng tried again and again, stubbornly striving for success. However, the main character was unable to achieve the desired result, which is why he had to start from the very beginning each time. As a result, the guy became terribly angry, and his irritation accumulated like a snowball. But Han Feng did not give up and continued his attempts. This man's tenacity was enviable. And now, once again, the crucial moment has arrived, which will decide everything, whether the main character will be able to carry out his plan or not. With the right timing and concentration, Han Feng used the ability, and the meat increased in size several times. A satisfied smile appeared on the young man's lips. And then the main character collapsed exhausted on the floor, feeling all his strength leaving him after the intense work. He finally managed to find a way to synthesize meat after so much time and countless attempts. The world was already in the 4th day of the catastrophe. The entire country was experiencing this event with horror. To make life easier for ordinary people during such a difficult period, all regions are actively fighting natural disasters. Due to heavy snowfall, transport has been halted, and local authorities are actively delivering all necessary resources. Just like in a previous life, everything begins to fail little by little, and people feel increasingly helpless in the face of crisis. A group message arrived on Han Feng's phone. The conversation began to get a bit hectic again, so the protagonist decided to quickly find out the reason for all the commotion. Surely everyone has already watched the news, and is now starting to argue about how to survive in conditions of growing uncertainty. Uncle Lu walked out to the crowd and asked them point blank whether they really believed what the news was saying about the current situation. If the situation were under control, as the government claims, rescuers would have arrived here long ago with help for all those in need. The neighbor heard from friends that they had noticed a lot of armored vehicles, tanks, and other heavy weapons on the streets. Therefore, there is a suspicion that a war may begin. The apartment residents began to worry, because if this was all true, then they were simply doomed to dire consequences. The protagonist remembered that before his reincarnation, he had already heard something similar about an impending war that could change everything around him. At 1 o'clock, Jiang Xueyu came in and said that if Uncle Liu's words were true, then they needed to take immediate measures to save themselves. Some people have already run out of food, and it is unknown when rescuers will arrive, which means we need to help those who are experiencing serious difficulties. Therefore, the hero suggested that residents with sufficient food donate some to those in need in order to survive in these conditions. Jiang Xueyu was willing to give half of his provisions, so he allowed people to come to him whenever necessary. Wu Kuanyu agreed with Brother Jiang's words and suggested that Hunya should be the first to sacrifice something else to support the initiative. The girl began to get indignant. She believed that the guy was still angry that she had refused to go on a date with him earlier. Chat participants began actively discussing the proposed idea, expressing various opinions and suggestions for assistance. As a result, everyone who could help volunteered to do so, showing their willingness to support others in difficult times. Since so many people had volunteered, Jiang Xueyu proposed that they appoint responsible representatives from among the residents to coordinate the action. Something like a temporary emergency committee that will be responsible for coordinating and supporting all those in need of help. The protagonist chuckled. Everything was exactly the same as before the rebirth, when people united in difficult times. This is nothing more than a way to deceive those who donate food, hoping for a better future for everyone. On the 5th day, the temperature dropped to -40 degrees, and the heating system was completely turned off due to the extreme cold. Everyone is now looking for a way to warm up and maintain body temperature so as not to freeze in such terrible conditions. Just like in my past life, the situation only gets worse every day, and hope fades along with the warmth. But for Han Feng, everything was completely different. His life was full of comfort and tranquility, unlike others. The young man spent his time carefree, ate delicious food, played video games all day long, and simply relaxed without worries. Then he received a call on his phone from an unknown number, which disturbed his peace at that moment. It turned out to be a representative of the 8th house, who announced that they would be clearing the road in 20 minutes and asked us to come to them. The man didn't know that the main character didn't care about this cleaning and wasn't going to waste his time on it. However, Han Feng decided not to quarrel with his neighbors, as he wanted to minimize the possibility of his apartment's secrets being revealed. Snow covered almost the entire first floor, creating inconvenience for all residents and making it difficult to move around the building. The residents were outraged. They had only cleared the road yesterday, and now they could barely even open the door because of the snow. One of the men called out to the black-haired boy and asked him to come closer to them, but Han Feng rolled his eyes in irritation. 1, 2, 3, 3 men threw themselves at the door with force, trying to open it in the heavy snowfall. Finally, it gave in and opened with a loud creak, releasing cold air into the entrance. There was too much snow. A stream of cold air immediately rushed into the entrance. It was even difficult to open my eyes from the sharp wind. Going outside in such weather will sooner or later result in frostbite, and perhaps even death for the unwary. Only a fool would go out in such terrible weather to clear anything outside, because it's easy to get frostbite now. A voice that seemed familiar to Han Feng volunteered to bravely go outside despite the severe cold and snowstorm. Of course, it was Bro Li, who didn't miss the opportunity to call all the residents weaklings who couldn't overcome their fear. They, in turn, answered the blonde that these were not just jokes for him, since in this case it would be best to do without bragging. However, Brother Li did not listen to them, but enthusiastically rushed to clear away the snowdrifts, full of dangers and difficulties. As a result, he found himself inside a snowdrift, and after a few minutes he began desperately calling for help, realizing his mistake. The residents of the house immediately helped the poor fellow escape from the snow captivity, showing solidarity and support for each other. The main character immediately jumped up to his brother Li and asked how he was feeling in such a difficult situation. Han Feng asked the guys to find the main guy in the parking lot and mark him. It would be better to wait until the snow stopped completely. They won't be able to remove this snow by hand because there is too much of it, and it continues to fall from the sky. Jiang Xueyu echoed the same sentiment and added that the underground parking lot would be designated as a donation and assistance area. Now the protagonist has learned what this man who could hide his true intentions really looks like. This means that this is the person who heads the deception committee that uses people for its own interests. The seemingly friendly young man once again thanked all the residents for their concern and willingness to help. He really didn't expect so many residents to be willing to donate their supplies. Now they can hold out a little longer. People were confident that only by uniting could they survive this ongoing crisis, which had dragged on for a long time. No one knew that the disaster would not end, which meant that people would soon regret this decision and their actions. Bro Li told the protagonist that he would go upstairs to get some rest from all the hustle and bustle and cold. Zhang Shuiyu's attention was drawn to a girl walking with boxes, looking very focused on her task. It was the same senior nurse from the clinic who was right now carrying boxes of medicines for those in need. Suddenly, a person touched her, and everything that the young girl was holding began to fall to the ground in a chaotic manner. The protagonist managed to stop his fall in time and worriedly asked the nurse if she was okay after such an incident. Jingzhu thanked the guy and immediately recognized him, remembering how they had met earlier at the clinic. But she was extremely surprised by the fact that the main character's leg managed to heal so quickly after the fracture that she saw. Han Feng came up with a stupid excuse that his body had been good at regenerating and quickly recovering from injuries since childhood. The girl naively believed this nonsense and joyfully exclaimed that this was very cool and amazing for a person of his age. The protagonist offered to help with the boxes as a thank you for the bandage and medical assistance provided. Jingxu thanked the young man for his efforts, realizing that together they could do more for other people. But the dark-haired guy didn't expect the box to be so heavy for his fragile body. The head nurse explained that there were only some medications inside for donation and to help those in need. If suddenly the young man was in trouble, she could bear everything herself, because she had the strength that could cope with any difficulties. The protagonist replied that it was not hard for him at all, although in reality everything was completely different, and he felt completely exhausted. Jingxu asked her not to pretend. She was simply much stronger than most of the guys in this world, and this had helped her out in difficult situations more than once. Han Feng suggested that it was some kind of innate power, to which the girl replied that she had her own reasons that she could not talk about. The girl's expression was sad and sweet at the same time, so the hero could not take his eyes off her expressive features. The head nurse apologized and explained that she could not explain everything herself, as her past was too complex and confusing. Suddenly, it dawned on Jing Shui that she still didn't know the name of her patient who had just volunteered to help her with the heavy boxes. Without hesitation, the boy said his name, and at that moment, confidence and kindness sounded in his voice. With a wide smile on her face, the young girl gave her name and said that she was very pleased to meet him, because she sincerely appreciated new friends. From the conversation, Jing Shui learned that the guy was lazy in life and did nothing, but at the same time he dreamed of great achievements. Suddenly, one of the men pushed the young girl and rudely ordered her to get out of the way, which caused confusion among everyone present. This caused Jing Shui to bump into the protagonist, making the situation even more awkward for both of them. Her large breasts immediately pressed against the young man's shoulder, and he felt his heart beat faster from surprise. Han Feng's face immediately turned deep red. He felt everything clearly, and obscene thoughts began to creep into his head again, which embarrassed him. Jingshu immediately pulled away and apologized for the situation, feeling extremely awkward after this confrontation. Suddenly, Hyuna approached the hero and asked why he didn't say that he would also leave his apartment on such a frosty day. The blonde grabbed the hero's shoulder and asked if this was his new girlfriend, the one he was spending time with instead of working. Jingyu decided not to interfere any longer, took the boxes and said goodbye to the guy, thanking him for helping with the heavy load. Hyuna said that she came for supplies. He didn't even write to her, so the heroine even began to worry about his condition. Han Feng lied that he was just about to write, but in reality, he just didn't want to bother her unnecessarily. Suddenly, the blonde asked the young man if he had any extra food at home, as it was starting to run out in the refrigerator. A smile appeared on the protagonist's lips as he remembered his reserves and how quickly they were being depleted. He didn't have much food at home either, but he could borrow it. But Han Feng remembered that the girl didn't reply to the message. Therefore, the hero invited the blonde to stay with him for a couple of days so that she could rest and regain her strength. The beauty's face immediately showed concern at such a proposal, and her thoughts began to get confused in her head. She explained that at that moment she didn't quite understand the situation. If a guy wants to chat, he can write at any time without embarrassment. Han Feng turned away and yawned, saying that since it was a refusal, he was heading home to his own affairs and concerns. The blonde stopped him and tried to explain that she takes serious relationships between people extremely seriously. She didn't want others to think that they were only meeting for supplies and food, so the heroine asked for some time to think. If Han Fen hadn't died then, he might have believed this nonsense about feelings and mutual understanding between them. If only he knew who that mysterious man was who suddenly appeared in his life and left so many questions. The protagonist decided not to search. He simply had to behave the same way as before his reincarnation into this world. We need to wait a little, and then Hyuna herself will bring this person who, perhaps, will change everything around. Han Feng told the blonde that he was just joking, hoping that she wouldn't take it seriously and wouldn't be upset. The young girl's face showed surprise when she realized that not all jokes had a light subtext. The protagonist promised to wait for an answer, and said that tomorrow he would bring the young girl some food to please her. At this point, the heroes said goodbye, each of them immersed in their own thoughts and worries about the future. The blonde was pleased. Her plan had succeeded, and she felt like a real strategist in this game. She didn't even suspect that the main character was in front, and it was she who was now dancing to his tune, like a puppet. For 2 days, Han Feng ignored Huna's messages, immersing himself in his thoughts and experiments. For days on end, he sat in his apartment, enjoying a fantastic steak and enjoying life, forgetting about the outside world. The experiments Han Feng had been conducting in recent days had helped him discover 2 important things about food and its properties. Firstly, meat cannot grow indefinitely, and secondly, it can be processed infinitely, just like soybeans. Previously, the hero ate half of the sprouts and processed the other half, and tried to do the same with meat. From half a piece of beef and a soybean, he obtained a whole piece of meat, and repeated this with another piece using the same principle. But nothing changed as the guy expected, because nature has its own limitations and laws. Now you don't have to worry about running out of food sooner or later in this harsh world. The world was entering its 19th day of disaster, with temperatures already dropping to minus 42 degrees Celsius. The entire island of Poduhiti in the Maldives, where the correspondent was now located, was covered in ice and snow, which was extremely unusual. The ocean is also freezing at an incredible rate, with experts estimating that the maximum ice thickness has reached 55 centimeters. Only the protagonist knew that everything was much worse than the media was saying, and the real situation was critical. Suddenly, Han Feng heard another crash outside his window, causing him to become worried about what was happening around him. This was already the 7th explosion. The protagonist had absolutely no idea what was happening outside his apartment. Outside the window, he noticed a multitude of helicopters and swore quietly, realizing that the situation was getting out of control. Beloved neighbors also began to panic due to loud sounds and the unstable situation around them. Residents are currently bartering various items and food in the underground parking lot in an attempt to survive the situation. Many even took advantage of the opportunity to extort money from other people, which caused a huge number of fights. The council said those in need must now line up to receive essential survival supplies. As a result, the main character went down to the underground parking lot in the hope of finding something useful for himself and his neighbors. The terrible cold immediately caused his nose to start running, which added to the discomfort of this difficult situation. If the young man hadn't needed information about the current situation in the world, he would never have left his cozy refuge and come down here to face reality. Han Feng remembered well that before his reincarnation, there was a riot that shook the entire city and left behind many questions. However, the specific reason for this riot was never revealed, which added even more mystery to what was happening around. It's best to find out the situation now in order to minimize risks and avoid unnecessary troubles in the future. Looking around, the protagonist noticed that there were too many beggars here who desperately needed help. One of the residents started to get indignant because there were so many huge boxes of supplies here, and they were giving him some pennies that didn't solve the problem. He began demanding that the supplies he had donated be returned immediately, but the goods were not subject to return according to the rules. Jiang Shuiyu explained that the disaster was currently in full swing, so he asked the man to put himself in his place and understand the situation. Moreover, the guy with glasses promised to return everything in double amount, so the crowd began to condemn the emerging man for his persistence. They told him to take the food immediately and not hold up the line, which also wanted to get its share of the food. The protagonist was not surprised by the fact that donations could not be returned, since this rule had long since become commonplace for everyone. But to put oneself on a high moral level and accuse people of giving more than they receive is simply shameful and wrong. A guy I knew quietly said that he had never seen such shameless people who could so easily forget about others. Li Ziyi, clearly worn out over the past few days, waved his hand to his brother as a sign of greeting and joy at the meeting. Han Feng greeted his friend and learned that he had been doing well lately, despite all the difficulties around him. Only in recent days, Li Ziyi has somehow fallen apart a little. Although in the opinion of the main character, the guy was downplaying his problems too much. The blonde admitted that he was drinking water to stave off his hunger, as he had no more supplies and no hope for the best. Li Ziyi thought he would help and donated most of it to the committee. But in the end there was no food left at all, and the snowstorm was not going away and was getting worse. If only the guy knew everything about the real state of affairs, he would have saved himself more food for difficult times. The protagonist approached his brother and whispered to him to do him one favor that could ease his suffering. Li Ziyi was taken aback when he learned that the boy could just give him 4 noodles and 2 sausages from his supplies. The blonde was immensely happy and grateful that his brother was not abandoning him to hunger and cold in this difficult hour of trial. He promised to take care of everything, and Han Feng allowed his friend to come later for food without any unnecessary questions or embarrassment. Li Ziyi nodded and said that he would now go and stand in line for supplies to help himself and his friend. Just a few packs of instant noodles and a couple of sausages could have saved the protagonist's day from hunger pangs. Of course, it was a bit of a shame to send my brother there in such a difficult situation. but lying at home on the couch was much better. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to the protagonist, which made him become wary and pay attention to what was happening around him. Hyuna suddenly walked up to the guy and slapped him across the face with a force that made him surprised by her actions. And then she angrily muttered through her teeth that he had completely undermined her trust with his thoughtless actions and words. For a moment, the protagonist was even taken aback that this impudent woman dared to hit him in the face without warning or reason. He hadn't yet settled accounts for the past, and she slapped him again, as if it was a habit for her in their relationship. Apparently, this girl thought she could boss him around so easily, but that was not the case at all, and he was not going to tolerate it. Meanwhile, Hyuna continued to be indignant and did not understand why the guy continued to remain silent and pretended to be deaf, as if this would change anything. The protagonist coldly apologized to her, although in fact his apology was insincere and did not reflect his true feelings. The guy lied that in fact those supplies were stolen. He left them at the door and returned for the keys, and when he left they had already disappeared without a trace. The blonde asked fearfully if the guy had any more food, her voice trembling with excitement and fear for her future in this world. Han Fen replied that there was very little of it. If he left one meal a day, it would only last for a couple of days, and this was extremely sad. The beauty was delighted to hear this, because plans were already beginning to form in her head about how they could survive together. If the hero eats once every 2 days, then there will be enough for Hyuna too, so they can survive the disaster together and maintain hope. This impudent woman clearly had neither shame nor conscience. She uttered all these words with such ease, as if the lives of others were indifferent to her. Of course, in her eyes, Han Fen seemed like just a tool that could be used if necessary to achieve her goals. The hero agreed, as he had already promised the girl half of his supplies, even if it would be unprofitable for him. He promised to write in the evening after cleaning, and Hyuna replied that she would definitely wait for his message with impatience and hope. The blonde said goodbye, and the protagonist didn't want to keep her, realizing that she needed to hurry on with her business. Throughout the evening, Hyuna kept texting Han Feng, asking if she could come over to see him now and get his support. The heroine did not understand what he was doing that he did not answer either messages or calls, and this made her worried. The elevator in the building also stopped working, adding extra difficulties and making her nervous when climbing to the upper floors. Han Feng's apartment was located high up, so to reach it, Hyuna had to climb the stairs with great difficulty. If it weren't for the supplies, the beauty would never have gone to that stupid Han Feng on such a cold and inhospitable evening. She was suddenly overcome by extreme fatigue. The young girl had not eaten anything for the last few days and felt exhausted, but she almost reached her goal, although every step was taken with great difficulty and effort. Suddenly, the light on the stairwell went out, plunging it into complete darkness and creating an atmosphere of anxiety around. The young girl shuddered. It frightened her and made her heart beat faster from fear of the unknown. Footsteps were heard from above. Hyuna raised her head, but due to the darkness she couldn't tell if there was someone there or if it was just her imagination. That's why she was late in noticing the approaching bag of flour, thrown straight at her from the top of the stairs without warning. The light on the stairwell came on again, illuminating the space around her and showing her the whole picture of what was happening. Han Fen apologized to Hyuna, explained that he overslept, and when he came to his senses, he immediately ran to her. But because of the darkness, he accidentally dropped the bag of flour. The blonde screamed, asking if he couldn't do anything properly, and why was it so hard for him to be attentive to others. It's not hard to guess that the main character had everything planned out from the very beginning, and now he just didn't show off his intentions. Han Feng handed over the bag of groceries, hoping to at least make amends to the girl for all the misunderstandings. Looking at the contents of the bag, Hyuna noticed that all the food was spoiled and covered in mold, looking more like real garbage. The main character guiltily admitted that he had kept them for a very long time, and that this was all he had at the moment, and he didn't know what to do. But since the girl didn't need it, the guy asked to return everything, because he was hoping for something better in their relationship. The blonde hugged the bag to herself and said in a trembling voice that she needed it, even if the food looked terrible and inedible. The question arose, could this really be the same goddess whom the protagonist once courted with all his might, dreaming of her attention? Hyuna said that the mold was only on the surface, and the food inside should still be edible, as strange as it sounds. The young girl also took the flour, realizing that even it could be useful in difficult times for cooking. Hyuna was overjoyed to see that there was still half left, and this gave her hope for survival in this difficult world. The package contained such waste that the young girl would definitely have diarrhea for several days, and this scared her greatly. In the current weather, there is no way to take a shower, so Hyuna will be forced to walk around in flour and endure all the inconveniences. Humming a simple song to himself, the protagonist headed to his apartment, trying to distract himself from bad thoughts. However, he immediately noticed that someone was following him, so his face immediately became serious and wary. The young man turned the corner to test his theory about who might be stalking him that evening. Someone's shadow immediately appeared behind him, and he felt his heart beat faster from fear and tension. And then the man himself appeared, whose intentions remained a mystery to the protagonist at that moment. The protagonist abruptly pinned his pursuer to the floor, swung his arm, and asked if he was really tired of living in this world. But he didn't expect to see a girl with frightened eyes and a confused expression right in front of him. Despite this, the main character still asked if she really thought of following him. The stranger's expression remained unchanged, and her face showed absolutely no emotion. Han Feng wondered if she would continue to remain silent. That's why the main character decided to threaten that if the girl didn't talk, he would undress her right there. There was no reaction other than the girl's cheeks turning red. The protagonist realized that using threats was useless, so he stood up and decided to let this strange girl go this time. He told her to go home and not to walk around in such a place. Han Feng didn't expect the stranger to quickly stand up and touch him, making him stop. The main character asked her not to look at him like that. If the girl was not going to say anything, he would just leave. The stranger, without answering, pulled the young man along with her. When they entered her apartment, the protagonist's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe that this fragile-looking and very strange girl could have prepared such a shelter on her own. Did she really know that a disaster would happen? The stranger answered in monosyllables: calculation, result, ice age. The young woman explained that she had written in the conversation, and the protagonist remembered a participant named Marginal. Han Feng asked in confusion if she had brought him to her home just to show him off. Without answering, the girl pointed her finger at the screen. The main character didn't understand anything at all, but he looked away. On one of the screens, on June 30th, after 11 o'clock at night, he was riding in an elevator with several boxes. On July 6th, several workers brought cylinders into his apartment. And already on the 16th of July, Brother Lee came to the main character, and all of this was captured on camera. Accordingly, we can conclude that the girl was following him. The protagonist was taken aback when the stranger nodded and took off her outerwear, leaving her in just a dress. Han Feng blushed and exclaimed why she was undressing, to which the girl replied that she was just hot. As a result, the strange girl dressed in lighter clothes. The guy came to the conclusion that the girl was spying on him because she had suspicions about his supplies, the main goal being to establish cooperation. But what did she mean by cooperation? Quite unexpectedly, the stranger began to climb over the main character, causing him mixed feelings. This posture made Han Feng's face turn red again, and he asked the girl in shock what she was doing. It turns out the heroine just wanted the guy to teach her how to use the generator correctly. Han Feng did not refuse and helped to do it. The stranger nodded as soon as the protagonist asked if she understood everything. The guy was about to go to his room, but the young girl pointed out another thing she needed help with. Han Feng set up a water boiler for her and explained that the main thing for the girl was to remember to close the tap after use. And then the hero was outraged by the fact that the stranger was storing the cheese meat in the freezer incorrectly, since it should be unpacked immediately. The heroine also needs to follow safety precautions when turning on the gas. When there is enough gas, the fire becomes strong, and the food begins to fry. You need to check if it is ready. As a result, the main character prepared a delicious dinner. He asked the silent girl to eat before everything got cold. Han Feng felt like he had been working as a nanny all day. This girl didn't know how to take care of herself at all. The heroine did not deny this, and nodded silently, chewing a piece of meat. Realizing he had gone too far, Han Feng awkwardly said that he was just joking. Having swallowed another piece of meat, the young man caught himself thinking that he was tired of all this. He decided to immediately warn the strange girl that he would eat and then go home. However, the stranger fell asleep right during the meal. As a result, the main character carried her to the sofa and covered her with a warm blanket so that the girl would not accidentally freeze. As he left the girl's apartment, the hero inadvertently thought that today he felt like he had raised a small child. Outside the windows, the snowstorm raged incessantly. The main character opened the door, hearing drumming at such an early hour. It was a strange girl again, who this time came to the young man with gifts. Han Feng thanked her and asked if she wanted anything else. The young girl pointed to her generator and asked him to show her again how to use it properly. After spending a couple of days talking to the girl who lives above him, the main character realized that she was a complete idiot. This strange heroine had absolutely no common sense, but she seems to really want to learn everything she needs to know, since she drags the guy to her home every day asking for help. Every cooking the girl did ended up in disaster. At such a time, many people would be happy to have such food, although on ordinary days even dogs would not eat it. The protagonist realized that he still didn't know the girl's name. The stranger replied that she was a messenger from the true eye of the evil king. Realizing that the girl would not explain anything more, the protagonist asked her to forget his question. While the heroes were in a warm apartment and eating some food, the rest of the people were barely surviving in the parking lot. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone resorting to different methods to survive. People demanded that the supplies they had donated for the good cause be immediately returned to them. The situation was so serious that it was already starting to come to blows. Zhang Xueyu turned on the loudspeaker, and the deafening sound immediately silenced everyone. And then the guy with glasses asked everyone to stop. The hero asked if people thought it was absurd to fight for the last food supplies. This time, Zhang Xueyu's words had a negative effect, and people couldn't understand how he had the audacity to say such things. The hero in glasses asked to be allowed to sort everything out. The food given out was not enough, and the donations were running out. As Zhang Xueyu said earlier, this is simply ridiculous. Do people deserve to die of starvation? He asked them to think carefully about who caused them to end up in this situation. And people immediately answered that it was because of him. Then Zhang Xueyu asked to be allowed to remind him of something. People with more stock sell bread, which originally cost pennies, for tens or even hundreds of yuan. At such an auction, a loaf of bread is divided into 5 or even 10 parts. In the end, they managed to make a fortune from this disaster, and then suddenly a fight began for the last supplies. Zhang Xueyu asked, "Isn't it funny that those who have reserves don't donate, but only raise the price? Is it really fair that they should all die of hunger?" The leader of the crowd shouted, "The most important thing now is to get up and take back their supplies." People agreed with Zhang Xueyu. Why should others live in luxury while they are starving here? It's unfair. It's all the fault of those people. Because of them, the rest became like this. The crowd decided to take action and immediately return their food. Among all these people was Li Zi, who could not believe everything that was happening. These guys are clearly crazy. Something big is coming. The protagonist opened his eyes as soon as his phone began vibrating non-stop on the table. Bro Li told the hero that all the people had gone crazy and were now going to take all the supplies. This man named Zhang Xueyu incites residents to steal other people's food. They go from door to door, breaking locks. They were all armed, so the blonde asked his friend to hide and not fight them head-on. Han Feng didn't expect things to turn out like this, so he certainly bought guns just in case. But if these crazy neighbors got to his supplies, the protagonist was afraid that he might be torn to pieces. That was why Han Feng decided that he needed to prepare. From the warehouse, he took out 2 fire extinguishers, wire and tools. After a few intricate manipulations, he constructed something strange and hung it on the door. Suddenly, the lights went out throughout the house. People began to get even more indignant, but as soon as they noticed that there was no light in other houses either, they realized their hopelessness. Due to the snowstorm and the active consumption of electricity for heating, sooner or later, everything was bound to come to a standstill. Moreover, snow and low temperatures outside make it difficult to repair equipment. In other words, this power outage could be permanent. When residents realize they can't call anyone anymore, they will panic, and this in turn will lead to more serious unrest. The protagonist knew for sure it will be a real hell. Half an hour ago, Hyuna was eating instant noodles with great appetite. The guy said that he wrote in the chat that he would buy all the consumables at 50 times the market price, and the fools fell for it. The blonde spent more than 500,000 yuan on supplies and put his goods on display, which the poor began to buy. Hyuna did the right thing by joining him. The blonde smiled and leaned into his hand, which touched her cheek. As long as the man has supplies, this girl will be completely at his disposal and will obey any orders. Suddenly there was some noise outside the door. The blonde came closer to understand what was happening, and heard the indignant voices of the crowd. Suddenly they started banging on the door. The man froze as soon as the door swung open with a bang. At the threshold of the table there is an angry crowd with weapons in their hands. The protagonist continued to work on his device and did not understand why there was still no voltage. And then suddenly the device exploded next to his face. It was difficult, so Han Feng hoped that electricity and internet would be restored soon. Hearing a noise outside his door, the protagonist approached and looked through the peephole to see who had come. A girl I know asked a guy for help. This strange stranger always came at the very moment when the main character was busy. Suddenly, an image of someone hitting him on the head popped into his head. Han Feng reported that news had reached him that some residents had started to break down the doors to get supplies. So he asked the girl to go home, as he was not going to open the door. However, the little girl didn't go anywhere, but only sank to the floor and leaned against the main character's door. Voices were heard nearby. A group of people were hurrying, not wanting others to get ahead of them. They decided that they would go through every door to make sure they didn't miss anything. The men came to the conclusion that no one had yet reached the 18th floor of the high-rise building. They divided among themselves who would break into which apartment. Then the bandits approached the main character's door to open it with a crowbar. Han Feng held the little girl close to him and covered her mouth so that she would not make any sound, and the people behind her would not hear it. The knocking on the door became insistent. The main character asked the girl not to worry, since the door was reinforced. But in fact, he was also scared. The door handle began to twitch persistently. The men decided to deal with the neighboring apartment first. Now the protagonist was incredibly glad that at the right moment he had taken care to reinforce not only the door, but also the handle. Having come to his senses, Han Feng removed his hands and apologized to the girl for his actions. The little girl thanked the hero without emotion. Leaning his ear against the door, Han Feng concluded that those bandits had left, and there was no need to worry for now. Now, if he manages to fix this thing and someone dares to knock down his door next time, they will die from the electric shock. In other words, Han Feng was currently busy creating a defense mechanism that would deliver electric shocks. The guy realized that there was no point in explaining anything to the girl, since she wouldn't understand anything, and besides, the thing didn't want to work. The heroine reported that such an anti-theft device uses the difference between current and voltage. It's all very simple. First, you need to turn off the power, and then wrap the exposed wire around the door handle to insulate it. Then connect the ground wire of the junction box to the handle, and turn the power back on. The main character was taken aback when he actually succeeded. Han Fen asked how she knew all this, to which the little girl replied that the evil king's true eye was able to see the truth about everything. The young man asked to forget his question, and asked the girl to speak faster if she suddenly needed anything else. However, the heroine did not answer. Instead, she unloaded her things, which she had been hiding under her outerwear until then, and announced that she would live there. The main character was taken aback by this. If the stranger was joking now, it wasn't funny, so Han Feng ordered her to go back to his place immediately. Suddenly, the guy tripped over the wires and flew to the floor. The whole body was immediately gripped by pain. However, the pain immediately stopped, and amazement appeared on the protagonist's face. Han Feng was speechless when he saw what had happened to his coffee table, which was fine just a second ago. He somehow changed shape, and only now the guy noticed that his hands were glowing purple. The toolbox has also changed. It turns out that violet light can soften objects. The main character shuddered as soon as he realized that a strange little girl was directly observing this whole picture. Han Fen completely forgot that she was here too. In turn, the girl watched the protagonist's hands with curiosity. And then the little girl, her eyes shining with delight, asked if he too was a messenger chosen by the true eye of the evil king. Han Fen decided to play along and confirm the little girl's words. It seemed that deceiving her was much easier than it seemed. Suddenly, the stranger extended her hand. She explained that as messengers they must support each other and share blood. The main character tried to explain that she was a girl, and living with him was not the best idea that could come to mind. But suddenly the door slammed shut and the main character was left alone again. Han Feng still didn't agree, but it seemed like the little girl really thought that this was some evil king's lair. But still, what was this purple light that could apparently make things soft? It can be concluded that the main character has only 2 types of light, and the rest have not yet been discovered. Purple appeared when he tripped over a wire and was about to hit the table. The main character remembered exactly how it happened. The hands lit up again, suggesting that the light appeared immediately after Han Feng remembered the dangerous situation. Does he really react to the wire like that? The protagonist picked up a table knife to test his theory. Surprisingly, this ability even worked on steel. The table knife turned to jelly in just a couple of minutes, so the protagonist began trying again and again. The longer you use the violet light, the softer the object becomes. But there are no other changes. In other words, this effect was useless. Han Feng decided to test what would happen if he suddenly tried to mix the 2 lights. He took the same table knife and concentrated on his abilities, and soon he received the results of his efforts. The table knife somehow regained its shape. The protagonist glanced at the napkins that were on the table next to him, and an idea immediately appeared in his head. So he immediately set about implementing it. Han Feng soon learned that mixing 2 types of light could change the strength of matter. Moreover, the hardness is quite good. The man asked his brother if he was going to hand over the stolen supplies, and his friend called him an idiot. Why should he hand over anything if later everything will be given away to some women and old men? He needs to keep it a secret, otherwise it will all be over. Suddenly the man noticed something strange and asked his friend to look back. Somehow the wall behind them began to move, and the next moment a face appeared from it. The men lost their power of speech from fear and almost shit their pants. They immediately hurried to run away from the ghost. Han Feng realized that he could no longer breathe. So he stuck his head out and was finally able to take a breath of air, which quickly filled his lungs. Trying to do something like this with an entire wall would be too much of a hassle. Having dispelled his ability, the protagonist felt tired, but he still had one more task to do. It's time to check the results of the hardening. So Han Feng hit his wall with the sledgehammer with all his might. After some time, the main character realized that everything here was so hardened that not even a piece of the wall broke. Many residents have almost run out of food. The man only now managed to gather supplies. Suddenly, one of the Wang brothers twisted his arm and knocked him to the floor. And then he demanded that the man immediately tell him where he hid all the stolen food from the other apartments. He replied that he hadn't hidden anything, but the blonde didn't believe him, since he had just seen the man carrying 3 large bags. If the robber doesn't want to talk, you'll have to beat the answer out of him. Mr. Jiang stopped the blonde man. He suggested that we let the man go first, and if there were any questions, we could simply discuss them and not go to extremes. Zheng Shuiyu promised that he would deal with the situation himself. Wang Xiaowu decided to let the scoundrel go, and the man was saved thanks to Mr. Zhang. The robber looked up when he noticed the hand extended towards him. It was Mr. Zhang who, with a friendly smile on his face, asked the man if he was okay. For a split second, the hero in glasses' smile became frightening. The tenant of the house brought the remaining packages and apologized, since there were 5 people in his family, and there was not enough food for everyone. Zhang Shuiyu handed the man a tiny amount of food, and said that it was for him and his family for today, and he was surprised. Rules are rules. A person gives everything he was able to collect and therefore receives a reward in a fixed amount. The man thanked the gentleman with a trembling voice. The man promised to carry out any order if necessary, and Zhang Shuiyu nodded. And then the hero in glasses asked the rest of the residents to go home if they had already received their supplies. The Wang brothers couldn't understand how the highly respected gentleman managed to force this impudent man to give up all the hidden food. Zhang Shuiyu replied that he hadn't actually done anything. He had just spoken to him sincerely. The country's history has seen several rebellions and conflicts caused by the clash of interests between different classes. But this is normal collective behavior. Zhang Shuiyu only told him that if he breaks the rules, the collective will condemn him. Not to mention the possibility of being legally detained once the global catastrophe is over. Until then, he will be subjected to reprisals from the robbed residents. However, an important point is that among such rebels, there is always a leader who directs their actions. In troubled times, heroes always emerge, and this guy with glasses is no ordinary man. The main character is already tired of swinging his club and trying to break the wall and windows in his apartment. Now we can say for sure that the entire apartment is fortified, and quite well. Hearing a knock at his door, Han Feng assumed that someone had come for supplies again, so he quietly approached it. The guy looked through the peephole and asked who was there. It turned out that Hyuna was standing on the other side. She had been thinking a lot lately, and realized that she couldn't drown out her feelings for him. Only through adversity can one understand true love. But if a guy doesn't believe, he can simply open the door and touch her heart. A moment from a past life appeared in the protagonist's head. This impudent woman said the same thing back then. This means that besides her, there is also that man standing behind the door. Finally, this moment has come. Now the main character can finish off these bastards right on the spot. But suddenly Han Feng remembered that there was no light, which meant he would be visible, and the enemy could kill him with one blow if something went wrong. If we were to rely on an electric shock, then they would need to touch the door handle at the same time, which is clearly impossible. Han Feng needed to calm down. He had finally reached this moment, so it was better not to rush and think things over first. The biggest threat to the hero now is not Hyuna, but a man hiding somewhere in the darkness. But the protagonist can't just walk out to determine his position and strike. Suddenly an idea came to my mind. I remember he was hiding somewhere behind the door. The young man walked up to the wall and assumed that the deadly man was standing in that area. It will take time, but the plan should work. The protagonist's hand began to glow with a purple light. The blonde called out to Han Feng and begged him to open the door for her. They needed to talk right now. Her partner didn't understand whether this guy was even worth being robbed. Hyuna was sure this fool still had food. She remembered very well that just recently, before the disaster, he had unloaded a whole truck with supplies at his place. The enemy grinned, completely oblivious to what was happening right now behind his back. A couple of scoundrels heard strange sounds. The blonde's partner turned around sharply as the sounds were coming from somewhere behind them. And at that very moment, a strong fist hit him in the face, knocking out several teeth and damaging his jaw. The man collapsed to the floor, and Hyuna asked him in a frightened voice not to scare her like that. The front door opened and the main character appeared on the threshold with a fire extinguisher in his hand. The blonde froze. And then she screamed as soon as Han Fen used it. The blonde immediately began coughing violently after inhaling the fumes from the powder inside the fire extinguisher. As soon as the fumes cleared, she froze, seeing her partner lying beaten on the floor. The blonde man fearfully asked the girl to help him. Fear gripped Hyuna. She breathed heavily and tried frantically to figure out what had just happened. Suddenly, someone's hand appeared from the darkness. She grabbed the young girl by the stripes and pulled her towards herself, causing Hyuna to feel pain. And then the main character abruptly let go of Hyuna and pushed her away from him, causing the heroine to collapse to the floor. Afterwards, the beauty jumped up from her seat and rushed faster towards the stairs, calling other people for help. Han Fen was even upset that she ran around so quickly. Then suddenly the blonde began to come to his senses and slowly stood up, overcoming the trembling throughout his body. The protagonist hit the villain in the stomach and sternly asked who gave him permission to get up. The blonde man asked him to wait in a trembling voice, and Han Feng even stopped for a moment to listen to his words. The scoundrel immediately began to threaten his father. If the boy touched him even once more, there would be no trace left of him. However, the blonde immediately received a kick in the face. The main character pinned the guy to the floor and replied that he didn't care about his father at all. He wasn't the one beating him up right now. The blonde asked them to stop again, since they had no complaints against each other, and therefore there was no need to go to extremes. Han Feng slapped his killer in the face again, and sternly replied that he should be asking that question. Doesn't he deserve to live? Why then did the blonde decide to kill him? The main character struck again and again. He wanted this bastard to answer him. However, the guy was beaten so badly that he couldn't even move his fingertips. The protagonist's anger did not subside, so he reached for the bat that had killed him in his past life. And then he stood in front of his offender. Tears began to flow from the blonde's eyes. He didn't understand why this unknown guy had such hatred towards him. Han Fen shouted that he had enough of playing dumb and struck out. This bastard dared to ask about the protagonist's motives, although he himself had killed him without mercy in his past life. Suddenly, Han Feng felt a wave of nausea. He vomited right on the floor next to the corpse. Suddenly, the main character heard a rustling sound behind him. It turned out to be the same strange girl who was squatting, her face again expressing no emotion. She offered her help to Han Feng. The murder of that guy was very brutal, but the girl wasn't even scared, which greatly alarmed the main character. He explained to the heroine that if she stayed in this place, she could get hurt, since those people could come back again. For her own good, it is better for the girl to live at home. However, the little girl refused and said that she wanted to stay here. The main character repeated that this place was very dangerous. They could both die at any moment. This was no joke. The heroine stood up and asked not to worry, as the true eye of the evil king would help them. The baby said that she was tired and needed to go and sleep. Han Feng grabbed her hand sharply and asked her to stop. He told me to stop pretending to be stupid and prevaricating, because right now he is talking about real problems. Suddenly the girl asked to come to her. Han Fen agreed, but he still didn't understand what she wanted. The protagonist was speechless when the stranger opened the door. The man exclaimed that those who had already received their rations could go to their apartments so as not to take up space. Hyuna was also in line. When it was finally her turn, the young girl gave her apartment number and name, and then received one ration. Now Hyuna could at least eat something. That guy didn't answer her message once the whole night, and she still didn't understand why he suddenly lost consciousness. What worried Hyunu most was the moment when Han Feng finally opened the door. There was light in the apartment and warmth was coming from there, and that meant only one thing. He clearly had something to generate electricity. This bastard apparently prepared it secretly and didn't even tell her anything. But instead of helping her, he gave her an unnecessary bag of garbage. Hyuna decided to find out everything as quickly as possible. But then suddenly someone bumped into her shoulder. The man stopped and ordered the girl to do the same. He quickly recognized the beauty as Hyuna, so he invited the beautiful girl to join him as they lit a fire on the 5th floor of the hall. But the heroine refused, deciding it would be better to warm up at home. However, the man was persistent and said that he had a lot of food in his apartment, so Hyuna could even stay for a couple of days. The hero asked to think carefully, because he always liked beauties. Hyuna pulled her hand away and shouted angrily at him to get lost. His waist was of no use to anyone here. The man grabbed Hyuna roughly and indignantly asked who she thought she was, since she had never even donated food. Instead, the blonde simply came and took someone else's. Hyuna hit the annoying man in the face with her lunch and yelled at him to finally leave her alone. The man couldn't stand it any longer and also took a swing at the blonde. But suddenly the man flew into the wall and silence hung in the air. Nobody understood what had just happened. It was obvious that someone was in big trouble right now. People rushed to call Mr. Jiang. Jingshu asked the girl if everything was okay, and the blonde replied with confusion that she was fine. Then the head nurse handed over her business card and asked her to come if the girl started to feel any pain. Hyuna replied through a cough that she didn't need it, and thanked him again for his help. Suddenly the man came to his senses and roughly grabbed Jingshui by the collar of his jacket, calling him the dirtiest names. He pinned the girl to the floor and told her to keep her damn nose to herself and not stick it where it didn't belong. And then he swung and yelled that he would kill her right now. However, the impudent man was suddenly stopped by Li Zi, who with a light movement laid him on his shoulder blades. The blonde man believed all his life that the most disgusting person is the one who beats women. Mr. Jiang soon came running. The impudent fellow said that this girl pretended that she had the right to claim the supplies, although she herself did not give anything. Broly shouted, "Does a man who beats women have the right to complain here?" But suddenly the brunette was grabbed by the collar by Mr. Jiang's strong hand. The man in glasses shouted that the committee's job was to protect everyone and not let people die of hunger. He let the man go and asked him to just pass by next time. Since 2 people were injured, Mr. Jiang invited them to join the committee. However, Li Zi was not interested in robbery. He would not join this gang even if he was dying of hunger. Jingzhu also refused the offer, as she was willing to help others, but only as a medic. Suddenly Hyuna asked if she could join. To tell the truth, she had always admired Mr. Jiang, but she had never had the opportunity to tell him. The man pushed the blonde away from him and asked if this was really a joke. That guy can fight, and the girl can heal, but Hyuna is useless. Therefore, Jiang Shuiyu apologized and turned down the beauty, as she was of no value to them. Of course, the man's words hurt Hyuna's pride. Mr. Jiang stopped as soon as the blonde confidently stated that she knew where there were plenty of supplies. Han Feng repeated once again that he had fan blades, and they also came in triangular and square shapes. The girl rummaged through her space, looking for the thing she needed. She took out a mannequin, but it was completely different from what Han Feng had been describing to her for several minutes now. In short, this girl has the ability to store things in space. She can open some kind of black hole and then suck everything she sees into it. But finding anything there isn't that easy. It turns out that the girl had never explored this space, so she didn't know exactly how huge it was. Han Feng suggested sticking his head in there and taking a look around, and the heroine agreed with this idea. If the girl puts her hand there, then everything must be fine. Although the main character was scared, he still decided to take such a desperate step. And the next moment he found himself in a place he didn't understand. This space was not just huge, it was gigantic, with various boxes and things flying everywhere. Now Han Feng knew for sure who exactly would take over the entire supermarket for one night. But suddenly the protagonist's throat was gripped by pain. Air stopped flowing into his lungs, and the guy began to choke. The girl deactivated the ability, and Han Feng was finally able to take the breath he longed for. The guy started to get indignant that she didn't warn him that there was no oxygen there. It was as if all the moisture had been sucked out of him. But now the girl managed to find the thing she needed. The main character was happy to see the thing he needed. But then the heroine announced that she had found something else, and Han Feng was speechless. A pile of boxes fell from space. This was exactly what the main character needed. The man shone the flashlight at the number on the stairwell, and they finally reached the 18th floor. His comrade doubted that this was a good idea, since a monster apparently lived here. However, it was the 21st century, and the blonde man in glasses found it funny that someone still believed in these ghosts. It was Mr. Jiang who asked them to check this place because he trusts them, and therefore cannot be let down. But what if that girl deceived their leader? The blonde asked them not to talk nonsense. They just needed to finish everything quickly and return. But of course they came. How good that the main character and the girl decided to follow. Han Feng said that they could now move on to the second part of the plan. First he would start, and then the girl would come out. It is very important to calculate the timing accurately now. The main character set the timer for 2 minutes. Suddenly, the three heroes on the staircase heard a strange sound and immediately tensed up. From the impenetrable darkness, a few glimmers of light suddenly appeared. And then, out of nowhere, toy cars drove out at top speed towards the gang of scoundrels. The heroes were taken aback by the surprise and looked at the toys in bewilderment. The blonde man in glasses was speechless when a car with explosives strapped to it approached his face at full speed. There was an explosion and men's screams were heard on the stairs. It turns out that inside there was the most ordinary paprika, which really stung my eyes. Following the toy cars, a toy quadcopter with explosives appeared. The girl asked the main character whether he should throw her an explosive device. Han Feng asked to fly closer. He wanted these guys to learn their lesson this time. There were 15 seconds left, and the men began to run down the stairs as fast as they could, away from the 18th floor. The main character asked to be careful not to hit the drone. However, the blonde man with glasses managed to find a weapon for himself and hit the drone. Left side control was lost, and it was impossible to stabilize the situation. In the last 3 seconds, Han Feng asked to do something, since this was their only drone. Time ran out. The drone flew out the window onto the street, and the sky was lit up with bright flashes of fireworks. The protagonist asked the girl to quickly find a place to land. The main thing is not to crash the drone. The heroine was able to do this. A place was found outside the window of the stairwell. Han Feng decided to go and get it, since that drone was too important for them, and they couldn't lose it under any circumstances. But suddenly the heroine reported that there was a corpse there. Looking at the screen, Han Feng saw a blurry picture and asked to enlarge the image. That man was Broly. The main character had absolutely no idea why he was there. A strange thought came to my mind. Could it be that this reckless guy had also been brazenly robbed? Han Feng said that they would return soon. He had the key, so the girl should under no circumstances open the door to anyone. The heroine held out the radio to maintain communication. The protagonist accepted her and thanked her. Although in reality, Han Feng hoped that he wouldn't need the gun, and that everything would go smoothly, without consequences. The protagonist began to slowly descend the flight of stairs, lighting his way with a flashlight. According to measurements taken by the drone, the temperature outside is currently around -50 degrees. Brother Lee's situation is very bad, so Han Feng needs to hurry up. The blonde man in glasses asked his comrades to be extremely careful if they were planning to go there. Jiang Shuiyu understood everything perfectly and thanked him for his concern. He ordered that 3 boys be given 3 pieces of thick fabric. It was Mr. Jiang's duty that they would never treat people unfairly with donations. The three men accepted the rewards and thanked their leader. Hyuna asked Mr. Jiang if she could join them now, but the man refused. They couldn't confirm their friend's guilt, and it would have been hard to believe that resources had been transferred, unless Uncle Liu had seen everything personally. Mr. Jiang suggested that everyone inspect this floor together, regardless of whether the information is real or false and whatever the young girl's goal. She must demonstrate her worth during the upcoming operation. Wang Xiaowu approached the beauty and handed her a piece of pipe. The blonde took the self-defense drug and replied that she understood the gentleman's hint perfectly. Every person, an important part of their team, needs to be aware of safety as they climb. In the end, the entire crowd went to the 18th floor. Suddenly on their way, they discovered a man lying on the steps. People immediately recognized that it was Li Ziyi. Wang Xiaowu quickly opened the thermos and gave the poor guy hot water to drink to help him come to his senses. The blonde's mouth burned and he immediately exclaimed that he was very hot. And then he saw who was standing in front of him. Not even embarrassed by those present, the guy said to himself that he was unlucky. Wang Xiaowu began to be indignant. Mr. Jiang saved Li Ziyi, and the guy didn't even bother to thank him for it. However, even if Bro Li wanted to give back to someone, it would be those from whom Jiang Shuiyu stole vital resources. The guy in the hat wanted to be even more indignant, but Mr. Jiang stopped him. Jiang Shuiyu once again invited the blonde to join, but Bro Li once again refused. Wang Xiaowu demanded that Li Ziyi stop refusing and being so shameless. Bro Li asked with displeasure if the guy was really trying to force him to join them now. Mr. Jiang explained to Li Ziyi that they simply wanted the boy to share his power and help those who had a much lower chance of survival. However, the blonde man knew that Jiang Shuiyu would only give these old idols one serving of food every 3 days, which was equivalent to waiting for death. Moreover, Bro Li has no parents, which means the committee's methods will not work on him. The protagonist eavesdropped, and from Bro Li's words, he realized that Jiang Shuiyu didn't care much about the members of his union. If this continues, conflicts will eventually arise within the committee administration. Wang Xiaowu grabbed Li Ziyi by the collar and shouted at him to join in or stop blocking their way. The boy's tone angered Brother Li, and he hit him on the forehead with his head. The guy refused to go anywhere, so he asked who would do what to him because of this. Li Ziyi raised his head and noticed that Lord Jiang's subordinates were looking at him sternly, as if they were about to attack. Jiang Shuiyu took a deep breath and nodded. Shivering from the cold, Brother Li put up his fist and allowed them to approach him. He's not afraid of the guys. This is bad. The blonde's condition is bad. It seems like he will fall at any moment, which means the main character must help him. But there are too many people. Even if Han Fen goes, he still won't be able to do anything. But Brother Li had already saved him so many times that the boy simply could not watch him risk his own life. That's why the main character took a gun out of his pocket. Li Ziyi suggested that they start if the crowd wanted to fight. A pistol shot rang out and the main character fired. The bullet hit the floor right in front of Wang Xiaowu, who fell to the floor in fear and looked at the small hole in horror. People began to panic when they realized the reality. The protagonist emerged from his hiding place, aimed his gun and ordered no one to move. Mr. Jiang's subordinates froze and looked at the guy in shock. Bro Li was the most surprised to see his friend. Hyuna didn't understand why this fool left his home, much less how he managed to get hold of a gun. Han Feng handed his friend the keys to his house and explained that they were retreating immediately. The crowd began to ask Mr. Jiang what they should do. It was better to take advantage of the opportunity now while the guy was not paying attention. Han Feng repeated once again that no one should move and ordered everyone to immediately drop their weapons and kneel down. The crowd was forced to obey. Now the main character and his brother Li could retreat. Han Feng promised to shoot anyone who moved, and so he and Li Ziyi climbed up the floors. Mr. Jiang stood up and asked his subordinates if anyone knew who this guy was. The blonde explained that it was Han Fen, and that it was his house they had been heading to all this time. Wang Xiaowu grabbed the girl by the collar and indignantly asked why she didn't tell him that this guy had a gun. Jiang Shuiyu asked her to stop because he was sure that this miss would not lie to them. On the contrary, you need to think that if this character has such a weapon, then there must be supplies. Perhaps he is the very person who is raising prices. In that case, the person Uncle Liu saw was most likely this boy. Wang Xiaowu decided to ask if they were still sticking to the original plan, since that guy might actually shoot. However, if Han Feng was unlikely to be capable of murder, and Mr. Jiang doubted that he could sit in the apartment forever. So he told everyone to go back to prepare some security measures. They will clear the 18th floor as soon as possible. Bro Li apologized to his brother for his slowness. He tried to open the door with the key, but his hands were shaking. Finally, it worked. Li Ziyi was surprised to feel the warmth coming from the slightly open door. The main character asked his bro to come in faster. Bro Li was completely baffled. His friend's apartment contained a radiator, a generator, and a whole room full of supplies. The protagonist awkwardly replied that it was a long story. A girl appeared from the corner and quietly asked where the drone was. Only now did Han Feng realize that he had completely forgotten his original goal. Li Ziyi asked in confusion what kind of drone they were talking about. 2 hours later, Han Feng told his friend everything and prepared some food so that he could eat well after so many days of exhaustion. The protagonist apologized and explained that he had previously been afraid that information about his reserves might leak, so he had not said anything. Brother Li stood up from the table and bowed. If it weren't for his friend, he would have died long ago from hunger and cold. The protagonist calmed his bro down and allowed him to continue eating, as there was plenty of food in this house. The blonde burst into tears. His little brother was very good. And then the guy said that now the situation in their housing complex is completely different. Li Ziyi reminded him of the information he had sent him before the power was cut off. Since that day, Mr. Jiang has been going around stealing supplies in the name of collectivism, and there are many who follow him. After several people left the group, the guy with the surname Jiang didn't seem too bothered by it, but behind everyone's back, he sent loyal people to take care of the traitors, saying that this was in order to reduce the threat to them. Among those scoundrels were the Wang brothers. It is no wonder that the committee developed so quickly with such underground tricks. But as they say, evil will repay its deserts. Li Ziyi asked to guess who these guys were trying to rob. It was about a guy named Li Zhenghao. This is a boxer who was once a middleweight champion. The protagonist asked if the committee members had been badly beaten, and the bro confirmed this. However, the bastard Jiang refused to admit defeat and lose face, and under his support, these people continued to march towards Li Zhenghao. In the end, they were all beaten by this guy. Because of this incident, Li Zhenghao also gathered a group of followers, among whom are two fairly famous people. One of them is named Zheng Yanyu. He has been involved in underground boxing for several years, and is famous for his speed. The other one is called Jin Zhongkai. He is said to be endowed with divine power. His body is as strong as a monster's. With the authority of these two and Li Zhenghao, they have already become another faction in their area. This group of people hates the hypocritical Jiang Shui. That bastard Jiang thought about how to resolve this conflict, and finally decided to rob Han Feng's supplies. It's no wonder Jiang Shuiyu wants to involve Brother Li. It seems his group isn't doing well. There was a sound outside the door. The girl looked at the cameras and saw that someone had come to them. The protagonist suddenly stood up from the table and exclaimed that he would electrify the door right now. However, the girl stopped him and calmly reported that she smelled sulfur. There was a deafening crash outside the door. These bastards dared to use explosives against the main character in the hopes of breaking down the door. But the heroine calmly replied that they should use homemade explosives. They are not that powerful. This bunch of creatures were hanging around outside the door, and along with them was Hyuna, who most likely brought all the bastards to this place. This could be understood from the way the girl was actively saying something to Mr. Jiang. The main character asked his bro to move away from the door immediately, and then he quickly plugged the plug into the socket, and a deafening scream was immediately heard from behind the door. The door handle electrocuted one of Jiang Shuiyu's followers. The group was speechless. This guy was dead. Jiang Shuiyu ordered 2 packages of explosives to be placed at the edge of the door that connected to the wall. Soon another deafening explosion was heard. However, the door still remained intact. There were definitely no problems with explosives, which means this guy had prepared for defense in advance. Mr. Jiang ordered to use 3 packages of explosives together this time. He will show the place for the explosion. They must seize this house today. At that very moment, the main character and his brother Li had already managed to drag a bunch of furniture to the door. There was another explosion, which was more powerful than the previous one. This time strange sounds were heard. The wall started to collapse, so the blonde man suggested quickly adding more things to block their way. If this continues, the cracks will become bigger and bigger. Han Feng exclaimed that blocking it was useless. Everything needed to be removed immediately. He had an idea. A short girl stepped forward and volunteered to do it all herself. Li Ziyi sternly exclaimed that this was no joke, so the little doll should quickly return and hide in the bedroom. He was taken aback when an incomprehensible clot of light appeared in the baby's hands. And then the furniture near the door began to move, drawing me into the girl's magical space. The blonde became scared. Could it all somehow be sucked in? The main character rushed forward decisively, his hands beginning to glow purple. At first, he decided to soften the walls like last time to see if he could change their shape. But the guy must control the area of impact. Otherwise, the hardening process will take a long time. As soon as the right moment arrived, the protagonist turned on the green light. It works. Violet light in combination with green not only strengthens, but also restores, which was just what was needed. Bro Li exclaimed in surprise. Did his brother really have superpowers? Suddenly, the shorty told them all to go to bed. Another powerful roar was heard outside the door. The main character had just strengthened the wall, but for some reason it started to crack again. The girl explained in a calm tone that right now their enemies were blowing up the floor. If that's really the case, then it will be useless no matter how it's repaired. Han Feng cursed quietly. The guy told the boys that he had a dangerous idea, so they should trust him at least once. Whatever it is, Han Feng should just say it. That's what Bro Li replied. The protagonist nodded and asked them to listen carefully to what he was about to tell them. Eventually, the group managed to break down the door. Wang Xiaowu ordered everyone to pay attention to safety and collect all the supplies they could find. Mr. Jiang told us to be careful because these guys might set up an ambush. There was no one in the living room, and there were no supplies. There was only garbage and a box of seeds in the kitchen. Wang Xiaowu started yelling at Hyun Woo for daring to lie to them, but the girl frightenedly replied that Han Feng might have hidden everything in the bedroom. Just at that moment, two guys went into that room. The short-haired hero opened the door and immediately froze. Li Zi kicked the door open with all his might, and it hit the bastard in the face. Then Han Fen emerged from the room armed with a weapon. His expression was unreadable as the young man thrust the gun forward. Assessing the seriousness of the situation, Wang Xiaowu shouted at Mr. Jiang to be careful. The protagonist fired, the bullet hitting the shield behind which stood the twin and his leader. Han Fen exclaimed, "They all must leave immediately, otherwise he will not be so polite anymore." Mr. Jiang coldly asked if he had been polite before. The guy hid supplies, neglected the team, forcing many residents to suffer and starve from lack of food. Today they are here to demand justice. If Han Feng still had any conscience left in his heart, he must hand over the supplies. Only by working together would victory be achieved. This man's words are righteous and reverent, but isn't this simply theft? There's no point in talking about it now. These people are just a group of hungry wolves who want to let off steam. The protagonist indignantly asked who had said this nonsense, as if he had any supplies. Hyuna exclaimed that he could have simply hidden it. The last time she was here, the house was warm and the light was on. If the guy told the truth now, he could avoid death. The bullet flew right past the blonde's head. Lee Hyuna is simply shameless for deciding to say such things in front of all the people gathered. If she hadn't deceived Han Feng by exchanging his reserves for the seeds, he wouldn't be in such a dire situation today. Wang Xiaowu indignantly asked if the girl really dared to deceive them. Mr. Jiang asked not to start an internal showdown, as he had a reliable way to verify the information. He ordered two subordinates to inspect the room, and then he asked Mr. Han if he would help with this. The subordinate carried out the order and informed his leader that there was only trash and a little girl in the room. Short Legs hugged Han Feng and screamed in fear that she was scared, and the protagonist began to calm her down. The crowd started to get angry. They had worked so hard for half a day just for this. Mr. Jiang approached Hyun and said with displeasure that he was demanding an explanation right now. Now that everything has turned out this way, the young girl will have to explain herself to everyone. Hyuna wasn't lying. She saw it with her own eyes. The blonde didn't understand why it was happening and where it all went wrong. Perhaps Han Feng is just playing with them. Because of this damned bastard, the young girl could now lose her last hope of survival. She ran out from behind cover and held the flashlight in front of her. The light immediately blinded the main character. The blonde immediately snatched the gun from his hands. And then she pointed the gun at the guy's chest and began demanding that he immediately tell her exactly where he hid the supplies. If Han Feng doesn't tell the truth, she will shoot him. The protagonist replied that the truth was that she had already stolen all his supplies long ago. With a trembling voice, Hyuna exclaimed that it was all a lie, and that she would immediately finish him off. But then something flew at her, and the weapon fell out of her hands. Mr. Jiang's subordinates twisted the beauty's arms while she tried to convey that she was not lying and was telling the truth. The main character turned his gaze to the lying pistol. He wanted to lift it, but someone else did it instead. It was Zhang Shuiyu, who had a faint smile on his face. Wang Xiaowu grabbed the blonde by the hair, called her dirty names, and said that she had really been lying to them all this time. And then the twins swung the bat. Hyuna closed her eyes in fear. Mr. Jiang stopped the guy and explained that the committee was not a violent group, and this room was also not a place of execution. Even if she lied, they should at least give the girl a chance to start over. Zhang Shuiyu told Mr. Han that he was very sorry about what happened today. The man held out a gun and added that they were all victims here, and that he would soon give him the correct explanation. The protagonist looked at the extended weapon in surprise, and then he took the gun. Mr. Jiang sincerely invited Han Feng to join the committee. The young man is not obliged to answer right now. He just needs to think about it at his leisure. When Han Feng comes for supplies tomorrow, he must tell Mr. Jiang what he thinks about the proposal. Finally, this circus has come to an end. Li Ji didn't know that the girl had an apartment upstairs, and it was so spacious, better than the main characters. If it weren't for her, all of this wouldn't have been possible. Some time ago, Han Feng told the boys to first take things out of the apartment, but leave the trash and boxes in place. Then the main character asked her brother to open the window in the room so that the temperature in the room would drop to low values. They must pretend that there were never any supplies here. Mr. Jiang staged such a raid that when they entered the apartment, public unrest was sure to break out. Then they will start looking for the culprit. Han Feng will show his gun, and then Hyuna will take the initiative. However, there were too many people, Li Zi asked. What if they suddenly simply took away this weapon? If Jiang gets the gun, He will want to resolve everything peacefully so as not to tarnish his reputation. There was only one bullet in the pistol, and the main character had already used it, which meant there was no need to be afraid of the shot. They will just pretend that they are barely making ends meet. But the main task is to destroy the committee. The next moment came when the committee was distributing food to everyone in need, and our heroes decided to take advantage of this opportunity. They acted covertly so that no one would notice them. According to Li Zi's observations, the first 4 floors are secured. The 5th and 6th are occupied by administration members, and the 7th and 8th are unknown. There was security on the 5th floor, and the blonde guy volunteered to go up first and distract them, asking his friend to try not to use the gun. Having reached the right place, Li Zi suggested searching everything there. There are a lot of people on the committee. It is impossible to cope with them all, which means the only option is to destroy them from within. The committee is friendly as long as there are supplies. If you find a warehouse and rob it, then the committee will be finished off once and for all. The main character understood perfectly well that he needed to be careful, because someone could appear at any moment. Turning around, Han Feng noticed that Brother Li had managed to find something. They found themselves at a door that had a sign saying warehouse on it. Everything was too simple, and it suggested that it was a trap. Bro Li suggested just taking out the key and seeing what was inside. However, the main character stopped him abruptly. A thin wire was wrapped around the key and the handle, a typical trap. Now it's better not to touch anything here, but to go upstairs and take a look there. Brother Li agreed with the proposal. First, the heroes will check if the warehouse is there, and then they will think about how to open the door. However, Mr. Z's people decided to check everything again, so our heroes were quickly discovered. A chase immediately began after them. One of the pursuers quickly caught up with the boys and wanted to hit them with a bat, but the main character put out his hand, blocking the blow. Bro Li kicked the bastard, knocking him away from his bro. Han Feng didn't understand. Li Zi himself said that there was no one here during the distribution of supplies, but apparently that wasn't true. The guys decided to go upstairs. In theory, there shouldn't be anyone there. Broly noticed that something was wrong with the protagonist's arm, so Han Feng explained that he most likely broke it. Suddenly, Li Zi's expression changed and he pointed behind him. The main character didn't have time to react, as someone pulled him into a dark room in literally a split second. The door slammed shut, leaving a worried Broly behind it, and Han Feng saw a hooded man right in front of him. As soon as the man sternly asked what they were doing there, the protagonist lied that they had come to get supplies. The gray-haired man noted that they had deliberately skipped the 5th and 6th floors, which meant they knew something about the committee. Voices were heard in the corridor. Mr. Z's men intended to search everything on this floor. The stranger approached the window and opened it, and then informed the protagonist that, due to the snow, it was approximately the 4th floor in height. So there is not much to fall here, but it is up to the young man to decide whether to jump or be beaten to death. The solution was obvious, but the protagonist still hoped that he wouldn't fall to his death. Therefore, as soon as the door swung open and the committee people rushed in, Han Fen was already on the windowsill, and then he jumped out after the strange gentleman. To soften his fall, the protagonist used the color purple. That's why the landing was more or less soft. Then the gray-haired man smashed the neighboring window with his elbow. As a result, the main character found himself in the building again. The stranger took him to a room and lit a fire. This guy is clearly good. If it weren't for him, the main character would have been discovered long ago. His words defied logic and Han Feng didn't really trust them, but the facts showed that his decision was correct. The protagonist asked, confused, why the man decided to help him. The fact that the young man didn't fall into the trap on the 7th floor proves that he has his wits about him. Judging by the battered guards, this man either came to steal supplies or to annoy the committee. Their presence interfered with his plans. The main character tried to sternly ask if the guy really had anything against them. The gray-haired man thought for a moment and replied that if it weren't for Mr. Zhang's secret, everything would have been much simpler. Han Fen exclaimed loudly, asking what secret was being talked about. The uncle came to the conclusion that the guy knew this man, and there might be some kind of connection between them. If the hero doesn't reveal everything he knows about the committee now, he could end up like that dead man. The protagonist told the story, and ended with Mr. Zhang coming to his house with explosives and taking his supplies. To take revenge on them, the guy took out a gun. With it, he had more chances. Han Feng hoped that the mixture of false facts and the gun would inspire confidence. The gray-haired man sighed heavily and said that the committee couldn't be scared by an unloaded gun. The fact that they hadn't taken the pistol away proved that. Apparently, the guy believed this nonsense, so the main character asked why Mr. Jiang didn't take the weapon away. According to the first version, he was simply putting on a show to maintain his leadership position. But according to the second, he has a more powerful weapon. In fact, the committee's original intentions were good. At least they did help some people survive. But Jiang's ideology makes everyone believe that only through violence can one achieve a better life. Even if the apocalypse ends, these unscrupulous people cannot return to society, The committee must be destroyed. In this world, the strong dominate the weak. Although the gray-haired man hated Jiang, the young man's idea was simply ridiculous. And then the uncle suggested finding out the opinion of a third party and opened the door. He immediately saw a man hiding behind her, so he immediately started a fight with him. Everything stopped as soon as the main character exclaimed in surprise upon seeing the familiar head nurse. Jingshu apologized and explained that she had simply collected supplies for her grandfather and came to give them to him. But as soon as she heard the noise, she hid. Now they might call her heartless and cruel, but the girl believed that only by surviving could she save more people. So, in order to come here, Jingshui had joined Mr. Jiang. The nurse nodded and said that the committee leader had kicked out many elders, and this grandfather was one of them. The protagonist remembered that, according to Broly, a new force had emerged in society that was opposing the committee. It is very likely that Mr. Jiang is trying to eradicate them. So you are driving out the old, sick, and disabled. In addition, he uses explosives, which suggests that this man intends to start a war. So now Han Fen had to find a weapon. He didn't want to be buried with the others, so he had to act. The gray-haired man pulled up his hood and allowed the boy to proceed if that was how he intended to die. In this apocalyptic world, Jiang's committee is only a small threat. But in the future, battles will become many times more numerous. As soon as the stranger left, the head nurse asked her patient how she could help. There was determination in her eyes. So Han Feng said that he had a little thing for her to do. Wang Xiaowu asked if the second person was really Han Fen, and the man confirmed this information. Suddenly the main character came out of the shadows, and the committee members immediately saw him. Wang Xiaowu tied up Han Fen, threw him into a room, and began to kick him because he dared to steal supplies. A man came into the room and said that Mr. Jiang had asked everyone to gather upstairs, so the boy could be left for now. Once the protagonist was left alone in the room, he used the green light to heal his wounds. The treatment was too energy-consuming, and Han Feng almost lost consciousness, so he decided to train his endurance a little later. Hearing approaching footsteps, the protagonist managed to react in time. Another person was thrown into the room. It was Bro Lee who passed out after being beaten. After some time, Li Ziyi thanked his bro for the slap, as it was able to instantly bring him to his senses. The blonde man said that as soon as his friend was dragged into that room, he had no choice but to break down the elevator door. Then the guy noticed some hole in the floor, which turned out to be very deep. Afraid that these guys would come in, he went downstairs. Li Ziyi thought it would lead him to the first floor, but he ended up in the underground parking lot, and it was empty. However, the young man noticed a pile of sealed boxes. Opening one, he saw that it was filled to the brim with sausage, each stick as thick as his forearm. The guy was about to take one to try, when suddenly he heard a rustle behind him, and he didn't have time to react. If the committee really had that much food, then why use explosives to rob Han Feng's apartment? Something is wrong here. Maybe this place could be Mr. Jiang's secret warehouse. Voices were heard outside the door. The boys didn't understand why they needed to get rid of Li Ziyi, but the master wanted to take him in. Once inside, the boys discovered that the prisoners were nowhere to be found. Broly deliberately hid and jumped out at the guys like a wild animal to grab them. Mr. Jiang sent these guys specifically to kill the blonde guy, which means he'll have to go down to check out the situation. The main character said that there was no need to worry. He had already thought everything through. First, he needed to meet with his partner. Suddenly, the shorty reported on the radio that the girl who had previously threatened them with a gun had appeared near their apartment. Han Feng ordered that the door not be opened under any circumstances, so that Hyuna could not be made to understand that the girl was currently in the apartment. Looking out into the corridor, the boys heard a lively noise. Wang Xiaowu gave orders. The wounded and the elderly went upstairs. The rest took up arms and gathered in the basement. Now the situation was clearly not in favor of our heroes. That's why they put on masks and decided to blend in with the crowd. Suddenly, right in front of them, a man collapsed on the floor and screamed in pain. Zheng Yanyu and Jin Zhongchai easily dealt with the committee member led by Zhang Shuiyu. Hyuna pressed her ear to the door. She couldn't hear anything. Had Han Fen really left? The blonde was taken aback when Jing Shui suddenly asked what she was doing here. Hyuna replied, "She's looking for something to eat." But the head nurse didn't believe her words. Could the girl really have brought so many armed people with her for such an activity? The blonde whispered something to the guys. The guys immediately headed towards Jing Shui, and the girl reminded them that Mr. Jiang told them not to interfere with her work. Nurse Jing's arms were twisted, because it was precisely with this girl that Han Fen would definitely open the door. However, the seemingly sweet and defenseless girl was able to easily deal with two men. Hyuna and the other guys behind her were speechless because a mere nurse was able to knock out the strong men right before their eyes. The blonde couldn't stand it. She took out a knife and slashed Jing Shui with it. At that very moment, the apartment door swung open, and a strange girl came out and began sucking all the enemy's weapons into the space. At that very moment, the protagonist and his brother Li were trying their best to escape from Jin Zhongchai. Han Feng had previously slapped the man in the face, and now he was chasing after them, intending to get what he deserved. The protagonist did not expect the enhanced attack to be so powerful. Han Feng abruptly turned the other way, telling his brother to take the girl away so that they could meet at their place later. Then our hero climbed onto the car and ordered to listen to him. He was the one who raised the prices of supplies so that everyone would die of hunger. This aroused the rage of the crowds, and they all rushed after the arrogant bastard to beat him to death. The entrance and exit to the parking lot are blocked by iron gates, but as soon as the main character uses the ability, the situation changes. The crowd stopped as soon as the gates began to glow with a bright purple light, and as soon as the glow disappeared, the gate broke and an avalanche of snow crept inside. People began to retreat in panic, so as not to lose their lives if anything happened. Han Feng was surprised. After softening an object of such a large area, he didn't even feel tired. Apparently, he had already gotten the hang of it. Suddenly, a familiar voice asked if he really wanted to die here. The main character had the feeling that this strange man had been watching him all this time. Hearing that Mr. Jiang's subordinates were returning, the uncle grabbed Han Feng by the collar and pulled him along. Once they reached the corner of the first level, the protagonist asked why the man decided to help, and who he was anyway. It turns out the man's name is Li Zhenghao, and he is the man who is fighting with Zhang Xueyu. A grin appeared on the man's face, and he extended his hand to the protagonist, offering cooperation. Han Feng reminded the man that he had already refused, but Li Zhenghao replied that he had now changed his mind. The protagonist asked suspiciously if he was trying to fool him now, but Li Zhenghao was only offering the boy what he wanted, so now he had to give a clear answer. This collaboration would increase the chances of success, so the protagonist extended his hand, agreeing to the proposal. At that very moment on the second floor, Wang Xiaowen informed Mr. Jiang that the convoy had arrived and he could give orders. However, the door to the first floor, blocked by snow, prevented any attempts to leave the building. Hiding behind the car, Han Feng asked in surprise where they got the military jeeps and when they managed to get them. Li Zhenghao heard something about transporting people, so he rushed off, leaving Jiang in charge of the boy. The bullet hit the searchlight, and it immediately went out, plunging everything around into impenetrable darkness. For Mr. Jiang's people, this only meant that they had been suddenly attacked and were now in a dangerous situation. At this very moment, Li Zhenghao took action while visibility was poor, attacking his enemies with cold blood. At that very moment, the protagonist put a gun to the back of Zhang Xueyu's head and ordered him in a serious tone not to move. The brunette grinned and said with a mysterious smile that he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Before the apocalypse, the protagonist had prepared a large amount of supplies, and Zhang Xueyu offered to look at the pistol handle. It turns out there was a wiretap there all this time. Zhang Xueyu must have put it on when he handed the gun to his opponent. The brunette took out a listening device and said with a smile that he knew about the hero's plan in advance. However, Han Feng didn't have to be nervous. Zhang Xueyu could have dealt with him long ago, but the guy was a smart guy. Therefore, the gentleman hoped that he would still decide to join them. As long as they sent people to them, they would be able to survive. However, Han Feng had no intention of becoming cannon fodder for someone else's purposes, so he resolutely refused such an offer. Zhang Xueyu sighed heavily and said that in that case, he was very sorry that they couldn't find a common language. Suddenly, special forces appeared from around the corner and opened fire. The main character immediately broke into a run to escape the bullets that were whistling around him. He was saved by Li Zhenghao, who pulled the boy by the collar and hid him around the corner in a safe place from the fire. Han Feng didn't understand what this guy was doing right now, to which the man calmly asked him not to panic. Jiang only has 3 convoys. Li Zhenghao will now deliberately distract their attention, and then the protagonist will be able to act without interference. And then the man ran out of the corner, deftly avoiding the bullets. He began to approach the special forces with determination in his eyes. This guy was clearly some kind of crazy person. His courage amazed even those who were used to dangerous situations. Time was running out, so Zhang Xueyu announced that it was time for them to move out, and then got into the jeep. The protagonist couldn't let this happen, so he used his ability with maximum concentration. The right wheel of the car seemed to have sunk into the ground. The car could not move further due to the unexpected obstacle. It seems that if you use too much purple light, the range decreases and you won't be able to sync both wheels. Suddenly, a passenger in the back seat threw a grenade at the main character. There was an instant explosion, and Han Feng was thrown to the side by the shockwave so hard that he lost consciousness. Immediately, the main character felt a tickling sensation, and a multitude of goats crowded around him, each of which began to lick parts of his body. Suddenly, a giant goat with a long tongue appeared right in front of the guy. She grabbed the protagonist's body, and it immediately began to glow green. All the wounds and injuries he received were healed instantly, and the protagonist felt a surge of strength and energy. The protagonist raised his head, his eyes and mouth glowing green, and he lost control of his mind. The car started. It's good that the car has a lot of horsepower, and they won't slip on the snowy road now. However, the protagonist was able to destroy part of the machine with one movement of his hand, disrupting Mr. Jiang's plans. Wang Xiaowen cursed, overcome with anger, and pointed the gun at the protagonist, his hand shaking with tension. Han Feng immediately grabbed the weapon with his hand, which emitted a scarlet glow. At that very moment, the pistol, along with the twins' clothes, began to dissolve into thin air, turning to dust, as if they had never existed. The blonde was immediately gripped by a terrible cold. He began to tremble, feeling how fear penetrated every cell of his body. Due to the sudden change in temperature, the young man's heart stopped almost instantly. Wang Xiaowu noticed what had happened to his brother, and immediately rushed at the scoundrel to avenge his loved one. However, the protagonist was able to easily deal with his weapon, using his unique abilities. Zhang Xueyu ordered everyone to immediately follow him for help. Realizing that the situation required immediate action, Wang Xiaowu began to tremble in fear, but suddenly the protagonist walked past him, ignoring his presence. Approaching another jeep, Han Feng used his ability again. People inside started to panic and the car started to melt. The special forces immediately opened fire on the main character. First and foremost, they need to protect Zhang's people from the threat. Li Jinghao deftly dodged the opponent's attack. His movements were fast and precise, like those of an experienced fighter. He had no idea what Zhang Xueyu might be planning, but his instinct told him to be on guard. At that very moment, the main character lowered his hands to the floor and it was immediately filled with purple light. The legs of both soldiers began to sag. They did not understand what was happening, lost in ignorance and fear. The protagonist grabbed the rope and used his ability on it, creating a powerful energy flow. And then with a wave of his hand, he chopped off the heads of both opponents. Han Feng heard footsteps behind him and looked back. From his half-closed eyelids, the protagonist noticed Wang Xiaowu, who screamed furiously that his brother was dead. Han Feng collapsed to the floor and lost consciousness, his body exhausted from using such a huge amount of strength. The blonde immediately received a blow in the face. Li Jinghao tossed the annoying guy aside and looked at the unconscious hero, realizing the gravity of the situation. This kid was clearly going crazy. His condition was critical and required immediate help. Suddenly, a clatter of feet was heard very close by, heralding the approach of new enemies. Li Jinghao grabbed the boy and the remaining Special Forces soldier and hurried to escape from danger. Mr. Jiang immediately rushed into the parking lot with reinforcements, his face focused and full of determination. He ordered everyone to be vigilant. First, we need to gather with those 3 fighters for further action. However, 2 of them were already dead. Wang Xiaowen died of hypothermia, and only Wang Xiaowu remained alive. The subordinate asked Mr. Jiang what they should do next. All the soldiers were killed, and the location of the headquarters was still unknown to them, which caused panic among the survivors. The plan failed, which means everyone must return to their baseline positions to analyze the situation and make decisions. The main character suddenly jumped up and shouted something about a hand grenade. Seeing Li Jinghao, the guy asked what the hell was going on, since they seemed to be on the 2nd floor. The man said that he had some information about Zhang Xueyu's plan and the group's future actions. And their imprisoned soldier can tell us more about this. He just told me that he was sent by the base to make a deal with Zhang Xueyu. The essence of the deal is weapons and food in exchange for the residents. They are exchanged to help build the base. In such a situation, instead of reducing the population, they, on the contrary, decided to increase the labor force. It all seemed like nonsense, but the soldier exclaimed that it was all for the sake of restoring civilization and saving humanity. Li Jinghao broke the poor guy's finger and asked what would happen if they didn't complete the task. The hero replied that in that case, the base would send even more people. Li Jinghao asked sternly, could there be people with superpowers among them? The prisoner looked away and replied that he had absolutely no idea what kind of superpowers were being discussed. Judging by the soldier's behavior, the possibility that there are people with abilities at the base cannot be ruled out. However, Li Jinghao was too cruel. Killing the soldier was clearly not worth it. But Li Jinghao didn't believe in fairy tales about saving people. The man asked the boy not to have any illusions. He needed to personally destroy them now, or get out of here in search of a new place. The protagonist said that he would first return and consult with the others. This Li Jinghao is a dark horse, who knows what his people are doing. But the man's words about finding a new place make sense. The main character went to the 2nd floor. He remembered that there should still be a few military jeeps left here. Too late, the boy realized that he had fallen into a trap. Someone from the darkness attacked him, but Han Feng managed to react in time and use his shield. The guy didn't think that using green and purple light at the same time would produce such an effect. The main character was about to attack his opponent when suddenly Bro Li appeared between them and said that everyone here was his own. Jingshu told her story of why she came back here, but she didn't understand that transporting people to a safe place wasn't a bad thing. Therefore, the protagonist explained that if everything was so rosy, then Zhang Xueyu would not have run away in the first place. In general, they cannot be trusted, but they cannot be completely ignored either. The big question remains whether any basis exists at all. If the heroes fail to find transport, they will not be able to leave. So each of them decided to explore the parking lot in the hope of finding something useful. In one of the cars, the main character discovered a whole suitcase full of weapons. Han Feng suggested that Brother Li should first call the weirdo to take away these things that might be useful in the future. But suddenly, the guys noticed that the girls were standing and animatedly discussing something among themselves and decided to approach. There was some kind of huge rag hanging on the wall, and some voices were heard behind it. The shorty took out a flashlight, and the guys decided to rip off the fabric to see what was underneath. Now everything has become clear. It looks like the base really does exist. They were able to secretly dig a large tunnel under a residential complex. These people are far from simple. If what the soldier said was just the tip of the iceberg, then the home of the protagonist and his friends is in danger. There was a drainage pipe in the tunnel. The heroes decided not to go further and returned to better prepare and explore the new territory later. Jingxue asked the boys to take more weapons, and Han Fen asked them to give him more seeds and a piece of pork. The eccentric has become increasingly able to control her abilities. She can easily and accurately retrieve things from her spatial pocket. This room is well hidden. No one will come here, so the main character asked the girls to wait here. He had specially reinforced the walls and the door so that even if they were discovered, they would not be able to break in right away. Now the threat comes not only from Jiang Shuiyu, but also from the tunnel. Since the complex was no longer safe, the heroes decided to find another way to escape, but through a tunnel. In general, the guys will see how things are and then decide. They wandered through the tunnel for an hour. Our heroes wandered around for so long that they began to think they were lost. So they decided to follow the pipes as this path looked more like a residential area. As a result, they managed to find a sewer diagram. They had already been walking for half a day, but found themselves just under the neighboring complex. There was a gym ahead. Suddenly, Han Feng ordered the flashlight to be turned off immediately. Military trucks drove through the tunnel one after another. These cars are apparently heading towards the Hancheng complex. Perhaps they are accomplices of those three guys. The main character suggested going and having a look. Maybe they could find out something, but they could easily be caught. To which Bro Li replied that there was no need to follow the cars, since he had another route. A year ago, an old woman from Hancheng complex fell into the sewer, and Li Zi had to pull her out. The blonde had an excellent memory. In high school, he was actually a nerd. But the hatch was frozen, and Bro Li couldn't open it. Han Feng suggested trying the next one, and Bro agreed, thinking that he had most likely just missed the mark by a bit. However, no matter how hard Li Zi tried, he couldn't open the other hatches either. And finally, luck smiled on the blonde, and he managed to open the hatch. They made their way to the underground parking lot of the Hancheng complex. Judging by the dead bodies, one could conclude that there had been a battle here recently too. Our heroes noticed people standing near the wall, either repairing something or the opposite. The soldiers were unhappy. The tunnel wasn't ready yet, and they were sent here. In this damned place you can't even eat properly. It seems that the residents of the Hancheng complex were also subjugated by the soldiers. Suddenly the earth began to shake, and people immediately began to run away in panic. The tunnel was about to be dug, and so it happened. The fat man broke the wall without any problems, and from his glowing green eyes one could tell that he also had abilities. Now it was no surprise to our heroes that such a huge tunnel had quietly appeared in their area and suddenly appeared. It was dangerous to stay here, because if they were discovered, the guys would be doomed and they would not be able to get out. The boys wanted to be quiet, but suddenly Bro Li couldn't help but sneeze quite loudly. This sharp sound immediately attracted the attention of the others, and the heroes hastened to hide through the hatch through which they came. As they ran, Li Zi kept apologizing for not being able to restrain himself, realizing the gravity of their situation. But now the main character had no time for this, since the fat man had almost caught up with them, and their chances of salvation were rapidly decreasing. The fat man stopped and hit the ground with such force that it created a powerful shockwave, destroying everything in its path. The protagonist asked his brother to run on, assuring him that he had a plan on how to deal with their enemy. Han Feng slammed his hands on the ground, causing it to immediately glow purple. The ground became soft, so the fat man was immediately sucked into its depths, leaving only half of his body on the surface. While Li Zi was running, he realized that things were very bad, because his brother was now in mortal danger and needed help. It seemed like the enemy was starting to weaken, and if Han Feng put in more effort now, he would be able to completely neutralize him. But then, out of nowhere, Bro Li appeared with a metal pipe in his hand and swung at the big guy with the determination to save his friend. The enemy's face clearly showed rage and hatred, and the protagonist's jaw simply dropped in surprise. The fat man's eyes glowed green, and he screamed with wild rage that he would definitely kill them. Our heroes ran in fear again. Bro Li explained to Han Feng that he couldn't just run away and leave his friend in trouble. This time, the boys finally managed to escape their pursuer, as soon as the main character destroyed the wall, and the passage was blocked by stones. The enemy doesn't look like he'll be able to escape the trap anytime soon, but the guys need to get out of here as quickly as possible. First, they needed to figure out where they were, so Brother Lee asked them to relax because he knew his way around well. Li Ziye had memorized that map of the underground tunnels, so there was no problem finding the exit. The blonde headed down one of the forks and asked his brother to follow him without any unnecessary questions or doubts. After a few hours, they reached the end of the cave. There was light ahead. Probably the guys would be able to get out to freedom. As soon as this happened, our heroes noticed how much everything had changed outside. Suddenly, the protagonist recognized the Dingfeng Tower. It is the tallest building within 5 kilometers of the guys' area. It turns out that the guys were going in the wrong direction altogether. Their residential complex, Shasti, is located inside the 3rd Southern Ring Road, but now the guys are almost outside the 4th Northern Ring Road. It looks like the only way home is on foot. You'll have to go through an area that's on a hill. Li Ziyi asked his brother not to panic. He had a lot of connections in this place. They would definitely be able to rest and even eat well. They were only 3 kilometers away from Jingshan, and Brother Li was sure that they would be there in about an hour. However, the snow began to thicken, and if the heroes did not speed up, they would simply freeze. Suddenly, the heroes noticed some silhouettes next to them, hidden behind the snowstorm, and they tensed up. Broly guessed that it might be his connections, so he fearlessly went to check if it was true. The main character didn't have time to stop this moron, who clearly didn't understand that 2 people out of nowhere wasn't a very good thing. And so it happened. Brother Li was captured by 2 men, who then told the main character to surrender, otherwise he would be shot. If the enemy were to shoot now, Han Feng's regeneration would be able to stop the bullet, but Li Zi would be instantly blown away. As a result, the main character surrendered, and the weapon hidden in his back pocket was also taken away from him. Soon the boys were taken to the villa. The enemy pressed a button and the gates opened in front of them. The power was cut off throughout the city, and it was especially impossible to bring electricity here. Han Feng assumed that the guys were using a generator. These villas looked like they were just recently completed. The question arose as to how these 2 men could have captured such territory together. But Han Feng didn't care much. If he could kill the enemies, he and the eccentric could turn this place into a fortress. The men pointed to the shovels and promised the boys freedom and food as soon as they finished clearing the snow. Just no tricks. Otherwise the guys will immediately regret it. As a result, our heroes began clearing the snow. One of the men stayed to watch them, and the other went into the house to rest. Li Zi whispered to his friend if they would definitely be released, but the protagonist could not answer. Han Feng's attention was drawn to the snow mountain. The guy noticed dead bodies of people in it. Broly's face showed horror and fear, but the protagonist quickly ordered him to remain quiet and not attract attention. Han Feng had an idea and decided to share it with his friend. The boys started arguing, as if Han Feng was doing nothing but digging around where Li Zi had already cleared the snow. A guard approached them, pointed a gun and asked what was going on, and the protagonist explained the whole situation. The man didn't care. The boys could argue as much as they wanted, but they had to finish their work before sunset. If they hadn't finished by then, the warden promised to shoot them, completely oblivious to the threat. The second man was at home at the time, reading erotic comics. He was interrupted from this activity by the guys, who noticed that their opponent was now in an excellent mood. As a result, the main characters stripped both villains and threw them out into the street, where they soon froze to death. Li Zi considered his friend's actions to be devilish. The blonde asked what they would do next, and Han Feng replied that they would of course go home. Initially, the guys wanted to look into the tunnel and immediately return, but due to unforeseen circumstances, they got stuck in the city. Jingzhu began to worry. The guys were late, and she hoped that nothing bad would happen. But the girls didn't understand that their situation was much more important now, and there wasn't a drop of concern in them. After Han Fen entered the tunnel, a whole army came out, and among them was some guy who was leading the soldiers. It seems that Jiang Shuiyu is on good terms with this army. Now all the residents of the area obey them unquestioningly. Most likely, Jiang Shuiyu had already organized the search. Li Zhenghao said with a grin. These residents are complete fools to actually believe that the army came to save them. The man approached the window and suggested moving it, since most likely enemies were searching the house, so it was dangerous here. At that very moment, someone knocked down the front door. Our heroes froze and stared at the passage in amazement. A fat man familiar to the listener stood on the threshold. He had smelled the scent of living people, and had come here. The army commander asked where the 3 scouts he had sent earlier were now. Jiang Shuiyu reported that this was definitely not his doing. Han Fen had dealt with them. The commander-in-chief didn't believe who could have killed 3 special forces soldiers. Now the brunette was lying unconvincingly. But Jiang Shuiyu explained that this guy has superpowers. Many have seen him melt metal purple. The commander gestured to keep quiet and not to say anything unnecessary. And then he promised to send people to find this Han Feng and deal with it personally. The fat man, as if distraught, asked which one was Han Fen. Head nurse Jing approached the man and explained that there was no one by that name here, and perhaps the guest had come to the wrong place. The fat man apologized and was about to leave when he suddenly noticed the apartment number 18 o'clock and realized that he hadn't gotten anything wrong. The pathetic humans had deceived him, and now the enemy was going to kill everyone if Han Fen didn't dare come out. Li Zhenghao immediately threw the girls out the window to save their lives. At that time, our heroes were racing home on snowboards. It was Li Zi's idea. The main character even looked at him with new eyes. Soon the young guys were already there. At that very moment, the glass in the building broke and the girls fell out. But Qiu Qiu managed to use her ability. Thanks to a huge number of blankets, the odd girl managed to soften her fall. The main character immediately hurried to the girls and asked with concern if everything was okay and what had happened. At that very moment, another person landed nearby. A fat man appeared from under the snow and asked to come to him, because he was a good, sweet boy, not a monster. And then the enemy rushed after our heroes. As soon as the fat man shouted that he wanted a snack, an idea came to the protagonist's head. Han Feng asked his friends to run on, and he himself reached into his pocket and felt the item he needed. Using the green light, the protagonist threw the object towards the enemy. The throw was accurate. The soybean flew straight into the fat man's mouth, and he, in turn, easily swallowed it. The protagonist apologized for such a modest reception. Plants instantly grew out of the enemy's mouth. Ignoring the pain, the enemy tore the plants from his mouth. But just when he was about to turn the impudent boy into mincemeat, he was already gone without a trace. The commander-in-chief reported that in such cold these guys would not run far. Most likely, they hid in the nearest building. The commander did not understand what had happened to his soldier, and when he had managed to suffer so much. The fat man explained to his boss that he ate the bean the guy had thrown, and a full-fledged plant immediately grew in his mouth. This interested the commander. With such an ability, it might be possible to solve the problem of food shortages. Therefore, the man ordered that the prisoner, whom the soldiers managed to catch on the top floor, be brought here. After a while, the commander-in-chief spoke to Han Feng through a loudspeaker, and they found the wounded man and provided him with assistance. The boys miraculously managed to hold on to the nurse, as she intended to save Li Zhenghao from the enemy's claws. Meanwhile, the commander said that if Han Fen agreed to join them, his wife, children, and brothers would receive a high status. The man's words left the protagonist dumbfounded, as he had never had a wife, let alone children. Li Zhenghao chuckled and revealed that he had actually only known the guy for a short time. But he already knew very well that Han Feng had no wife or children. Then the commander suggested that Han Feng not risk his life if he liked girls so much. There were plenty of them at the base. Now, Broly and Jingshui were trying their best to hold back the protagonist because he found this proposal interesting. Suddenly, Chukyu said that she had a plan on how they could save Mr. Li. They needed to work together. Tired of waiting, the commander stuck a pistol in Li Zhenghao's mouth and said that since the man was useless, he needed to be gotten rid of. At that very moment, something started falling from the sky. Seeing the meat and vegetables, the soldiers immediately jumped up from their seats. The commander-in-chief fired into the sky and ordered everyone to stand still. The soldiers immediately froze. The commander was sure that if they let their guard down right now, those guys might attack unexpectedly. But no one expected that a real bulldozer would suddenly appear from the high-rise building. QQ said that first they needed to scatter bait from the air for the hungry lambs. Han Feng explained that they should throw all sorts of tasty treats and supplies down on the soldiers from above, so that they would start fighting among themselves. Then the eccentric explained that Han Fen, wearing the armor of a steel monster, would break through the afterglow of sheep and save the poor fellow. In other words, the main character needs to break through the crowd in a car and pull out Li Zhenghao. But even if we close our eyes to the fact that the plan has a lot of holes and may not work, they still don't have a car. To which QQ replied that she had just recently picked up an iron beast here. From her spatial pocket, the eccentric took out a real huge bulldozer. But the car was cool. The main character was delighted when he got behind the wheel. The commander-in-chief pointed his gun at Li Zhenghao and told the boy to stop if he valued his friend's life. However, the protagonist did not intend to do this, so the commander was forced to retreat. Han Feng picked up his friend and asked him to hold on tightly, and then used the ladle to lift him up. Along the way, the main character managed to pick up the rest of the guys. But our heroes won't be able to escape so easily, as military vehicles have already set out to get them. The commander-in-chief ordered to open fire and not allow the enemy to escape. Only the driver explained that the snow was too deep, which was causing the wheels to slip, so they couldn't accelerate. The soldier also reported that these guys' bulldozer was very similar to the machine from their vanguard. In any case, the commander ordered to follow the tracks of the caterpillars in order to find the fugitives at any cost. However, suddenly objects began to fall from the sky. As a result, a huge pile of rubbish blocked the soldier's path. The main character said that he and his brother Li managed to find a nice house on the slope, so they will go there now. Jingshuk noticed that the light on the dashboard started to blink, which meant that the fuel was running low. QQ reassured everyone that the king had fuel. And then from her spatial pocket, she took out several bottles of the most ordinary sunflower oil. Han Fen didn't understand what this was, because before, the eccentric woman could easily get anything she wanted. QQ explained that she had thrown out all her things along with the refrigerator, and even lost the generator. The protagonist immediately became skewed, and asked if she had really thrown out his entire year's supply. The heroine said that all the guy's junk remained. Han Feng thought, if the plants burn, then he could try making a liquid out of the meat and set it on fire. So he asked QQ to give him a bucket and some meat. It's quite difficult to make something big out of meat, but it's very easy to ruin it. Having received the stinking liquid, the protagonist immediately poured it into the tank compartment at his own risk. Surprisingly, the car started. Li Zhenghao looked at the guy in surprise. He didn't understand that he was still keeping secrets. Soon, our heroes reached the house on the hill. The protagonist shifted gears, wanting to speed up so that he could reach his destination in a flash. However, suddenly the engine broke down, and the bulldozer was completely out of order. As a result, the poor fellows had to climb the mountain on their own. As soon as they arrived, it was decided to immediately light a fire in the fireplace to warm up after the terrible cold. This place was quite good. The wind blows the snow so that it does not linger at the top, and it is not so easy to climb up from below either. The protagonist went into the room to start the generator. Soon the lights came on in the house. Upon returning, Han Feng suggested that his friends throw a feast if they were already hungry. However, Qiu wanted to take a shower first, and asked the protagonist to teach her how to use the boiler. Jingshu approached the guy and said shyly that she would also like to take a shower, since she couldn't do it after the disaster started. The main character imagined a girl washing herself in the shower. A smile appeared on his lips, and he decisively announced that he would organize everything right now. Because the water pipes froze and burst, the boiler failed. First, Han Feng turned on the heater, then filled the bathtub with snow, and now he just needed to use a powerful heater. However, the water somehow heated up too slowly. The wait was long. The main character decided to check the water temperature. But then suddenly, he was electrocuted. He abruptly removed his hand, from which a red glow emanated. The main character froze and looked at his hand in surprise. QQ touched the water and said that it was already warm. But how was that possible? Does red light really have this effect? Soon, head nurse Jing Xue was finally able to take a bath for the first time in so many days. At this time, the guys were sitting in the living room. Han Feng and Li Zi were playing the console, enjoying the peace and warmth. Now it was time for Li Zhenghao to reveal his true identity, as he had come specifically to research his abilities. However, the main character suddenly stopped him and declared that he did not want to know who he was, and moreover, did not want to get involved in anything. The man nodded and stood up from his place. When his arm recovered a little, he would go down the mountain. Finally, our heroes were able to eat well and get a good night's sleep. Over the next few days, the protagonist strengthened the walls of their new house, as well as the roof and fence. And at the same time, he remodeled the sauna located in the attic of the villa. So now Han Fen could steam in it and calmly observe the foot of the mountain. One day, the main character noticed that someone was coming up to them, but that person had lost consciousness. As a result, the stranger was brought into the house, but it turned out that Li Zi already knew this man. His name is Chang. He is one of Lu's men, the same one who helped the main character get the weapon. Finally, the uninvited guest came to his senses. Seeing the main character, Chang realized that this was the guy who wanted to buy the weapon. And then he told that a few days ago their agency was attacked by soldiers, and many brothers died. Chief Liu listened to his buddy Han's advice, bought a ton of stuff in advance, and thanks to that, he managed to survive the crisis. But the other day, out of the blue, soldiers swooped in, took everything they could, and even killed some people. To protect everyone, Director Liu led them into battle, but many boys died. Director Liu himself received a bullet in the leg and was captured by soldiers. In the end, everyone ran away, agreeing to meet at another of Liu's warehouses, in one of the houses in this cottage village. Brother Li grabbed Cheng's hand and said, "They must urgently save Liu. Together they can do it." Li Zhenghao said that when he was fighting in underground boxing, Director Liu bought him out and gave him freedom. If the guys go to save him, the man will also join the team. He has many acquaintances in the city, so he will be able to help. Xiong recognized Li Zhenghao because he was the mad dog who had 30 victories in a row. The main character intervened in the conversation and said that he most likely would not go, since he was already being pursued. But to save Liu, he could help with supplies. As Chang expected, the Han guy had an excellent supply, but the main character didn't understand why the guys took so many cigarettes. It turns out that money is worth nothing anymore, and cigarettes are the main product on the market. The heroes then said goodbye to Han Feng and set off on their journey. After that incident, in order to keep an eye on the mountain, the main character installed surveillance cameras on the road. There are also cameras around the entire perimeter of the villa to help spot anything suspicious in a timely manner. The heroes lived peacefully again until that day came. A worried Jing Shui ran into the room and exclaimed that they had a real problem. According to Chukyu, they had only one cabbage left. Han Fen could only make wheat, soybeans, broccoli, and meat. But with the rest of the vegetables and fruits, he was a failure so far. The protagonist decided to try his luck and grow cabbage using his ability, mentally praying for good luck. However, contrary to his expectations, the guy did not succeed. Jingzhuk suggested growing cabbage herself. She grows vegetables on her balcony all year round. I need to buy a shelf for the balcony garden, soil, nutrient mixture, and also LED lamps for illumination. This was all cool, of course, until Chukyu asked where the guys decided to buy all this now. The boy and girl asked the weirdo in surprise if he didn't have all of this. Using a bright red light, the protagonist warmed up the frozen ground under the snow in order to collect some of it for his needs. The containers for planting the seeds had already been carefully prepared, so all that remained was to select the seeds and carefully plant them. The basement retains heat best, even though the heroes installed 4 stoves. But the heroine doubted that the temperature would be sufficient. Han Fen decided to try to speed up the growth of plants and concentrated on his strength, then carefully releasing energy into the ground. As a result, his attempt was crowned with unexpected success, and he felt a surge of strength. Then the main character tested the green light on different vegetable seeds. Although there were some setbacks, by constantly adding new seeds, the guy was eventually able to grow dozens of seedlings, which gave him hope. But after a few days, all the sprouts froze, and this was a real blow to their plans. There's little point in not improving the house's insulation, but in this house, it was the basement that retained heat best. The deeper a person is underground, the higher the temperature, so Han Feng suggested digging an even deeper basement. But first, the guy decided to study how this light affects stones. If nothing works, then they will dig by hand. Han Feng has long known that green light, like red, has no effect on stones, while purple softens them. Soft stones resemble dirt, but are still closer in condition to regular stones, which makes the process of their destruction easier. Therefore, the hero tried to combine 3 beams of light, changing the speed of energy emission. But it was all in vain. His failures resulted in plants turning into a black solid and meat into a black sticky liquid. A few days later, after countless failures, a miracle happened. Han Feng didn't expect that if the intensity of the red light exceeded a certain threshold, it would be able to shatter the stone. The hero decided to release the red light at full power and expand the destruction zone as much as possible to achieve his goal. As a result, the floor under his hands began to break and crack. 7 days later, at a depth of more than 10 meters, our heroes dug a basement with an area of more than 20 square meters. Then they improved it a bit, and then it became a greenhouse for vegetables, where they could grow their own produce. Now the main character began to think only about how to quickly grow vegetables and provide himself with food for the future. One day he decided to try to direct the flow of energy to germinate seeds and test his theories in practice. As expected, everything is bullshit. The mastered rhythms almost never work the way he initially hoped. The vegetables that the guy directly exposed to light died in the process, while those he didn't touch grew significantly. Perhaps the plants need very weak green light to grow, which will stimulate their development without harm. Han Feng's suspicions were confirmed. If the light was exposed for more than 30 minutes, the vegetables would stop growing and begin to wither. Since you can't grow everything at once, you'll have to treat them with light every day until you achieve the desired results. 5 days passed, and finally the main character managed to grow a large cabbage, which was a real achievement. After 2 weeks of work, our heroes were finally able to eat fresh vegetables. The main character felt sorry that Li Zi wasn't around right now. He would have definitely gobbled up a whole bowl of vegetables in one sitting. They left the mountain more than 2 weeks ago. The boys were probably already out of biscuits. Han Feng hoped that they were safe. Suddenly something exploded in the distance. This was already the 6th day in a row. But no matter what was happening outside, Han Fen believed that it did not concern them. This explosion only occurred once a day, so there is no need to worry about such rare events around them. However, 3 days later, the number of such explosions increased sharply, and they now began to occur much more frequently. Now this could not be ignored. The protagonist had to find out what was going on outside their shelter. So he put a ladder up and started climbing onto the roof of the villa, determined to figure out what was going on outside. Han Feng looked through his binoculars, completely at a loss to understand who could have done all this. There was such a fuss in the mountains, apparently. Someone wasn't at all afraid of getting caught. It seems like the distance is large. If it suddenly flies here, it will be a disaster. A fortified house is unlikely to withstand such an explosion. That's why Han Fen suggested that the girls build a higher and thicker fence, just in case. This can be done using the stones that are left over from digging the basement. You just need to pile them up. And then pour some water on it so that it freezes, and as a result you get a strong wall stronger than concrete. Then the 3 heroes got down to work and began to strengthen the fence. They had been struggling for 3 whole days, but now the huge ice wall was ready, and with such protection the boys could rest easy. The main character climbed onto the roof and noticed another explosion. The shell landed close to the house, so Han Feng quickly went downstairs and told the girls to go down to the basement immediately. They sat there for half a day, but then climbed out. The next evening, while the protagonist was taking a bath, shelling began again, which disrupted his plans. On the morning of the 3rd day, the neighboring villa was blown to pieces, and another shell hit the boys right in the fence. Han Feng couldn't stand it any longer. He decided to see for himself what kind of psycho was firing their guns here non-stop. Along the way, he discovered scraps of military uniform and suggested that it might be the work of the army. There were a lot of corpses lying around, which indicated that there had been a serious battle here. Han Feng decided to climb the mountain and look from there. Having climbed up, the main character looked through binoculars. He immediately noticed a huge cave that looked like a military base and suspicious soldiers firing their guns. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind threw them aside, scattering them in different directions. 3 unfamiliar heroes emerged from the cave, looking like a family. Suddenly, the woman smiled mysteriously and looked straight at the main character. The guy was incredibly surprised. He was now a kilometer away from that place, but this stranger was still able to notice him. The next moment, a shell flew into the place where the main character was. Han Feng miraculously managed to escape. These 3 are suspicious. It's better to stay away from them and observe. Suddenly, an avalanche of snow began to rush behind the main character. This was completely impossible. The guy was completely covered in water, and only thanks to his ability did he miraculously manage to escape and not suffocate. Along the way, a soldier was pulled towards him, whom Han Feng also pulled out from under the snow. The protagonist hoped that this unconscious friend could give him useful information. Han Feng reached the dilapidated building, tied up the prisoner, and began to wait for him to come to his senses. As soon as this happened, the hero pointed the gun, and the blonde began to fearfully ask not to kill him, since he would tell everything. The protagonist asked him to calm down and tell about that woman and 2 children. Then the soldier would be free. The guy exclaimed that they were not people who wield ice magic and shoot energy projectiles, exploding everything around them. Han Feng kicked the soldier in the face and asked him to stop talking nonsense and start with the white-haired woman. The blonde said that it was that stranger who fired the energy projectiles, which threw everyone up in one blow. The girl has explosive magic and can turn anything into a bomb, and the boy controls the ice, causing avalanches. Now the main character understood that there were many more people in this world who, like him, possessed magical abilities. Han Feng stood up and allowed the soldier to go. The blonde was delighted, thanked his savior, and ran out into the street. However, at that very moment, another shell landed next to the house, and nothing more remained of the soldier. These shells clearly did not arrive by chance. They were sent here specifically. So Han Feng was forced to strengthen the building. After the shelling, the anomalous activity did not disappear. On the contrary, it even intensified. So the white-haired woman offered to shoot again. If that guy didn't die, they would go after him themselves. The shelling finally stopped. If the main character hadn't fortified his house in time, it would have already been the end for him. There are 3 people with abilities there. If Han Feng leaves now, they will be fired upon again. This is why the enemies will have to be destroyed. In front of the dam there is a snowy desert, and on the sides there are mountains. There are 3 enemies, and each of them has some kind of superpower. The only thing that's worse is the guy who can cause snowstorms and avalanches. If he starts an avalanche from afar, it will cover everything with snow. Han Feng wasn't a sniper, so he was sure that at a long distance he would definitely miss. You could try setting traps in their path, but one of the enemies controlled the snow, which meant it was useless. You can also lure them downstream and open the floodgates, so the enemies will have nowhere to go. The protagonist heard that the ice in the Arctic is more than 2 meters thick, and that underneath it the water should be higher than the locks. Meanwhile, the heroes were rapidly approaching Han Feng's current location. The white-haired woman asked Yuanyi to start first, and then Zishi should follow suit once the boy ran. The main character spotted the enemies and started taking aim. A shot rang out and the bullet flew quickly towards its target. However, the white-haired woman, thanks to her ability, was able to save herself. The bullet ricocheted. Meanwhile, Han Feng climbed onto the roof. It was time to work hard to find exquisite curse words. He hoped that his masterpieces of obscene art would please them enough. Hearing the dirty insults directed at her, the white-haired woman picked up a bazooka and asked if anyone knew what he hated the most. What offended her most was that she was a slut and her whole family was the same. The heroes noticed that the guy was running away, so they immediately followed him. The white-haired woman was filled with anger. She was determined to kill this ill-mannered guy. Unsuspecting, the heroes followed the parachute, which was actually a decoy. The main character was sitting on the wall. As soon as the enemies came down, he used purple light. Now this is definitely the end for these guys. As soon as the rocks softened, the dam burst and all the water immediately began to flow. She quickly caught up with the three heroes. The woman grabbed the children by the hands and surrounded herself and them with an energy shield. And then the stream of water completely covered them. The main character's view was blocked by mountains, so the young man could not see what was happening below. Even if those guys don't get flooded, they'll definitely freeze to death. Now we can calmly return to the cave and destroy the cannons. Soon, a calm life will finally return. The protagonist quickly reached the tunnel and began to destroy the weapons one by one with the help of purple light. Only Han Feng decided not to touch the shells. If they softened, they could explode, and the hero did not want that to happen. As soon as the guy entered the tunnel itself, he stopped abruptly and his eyes widened. There were a huge number of mortars around. If the enemies used them, he would have a hard time. No matter how much Han Feng fortified the house, it would definitely shatter into pieces from just one hit from such a projectile. Therefore, the main character hastened to defuse this weapon as well. At the very end, there was a huge amount of military supplies, more than enough for an entire army. It's a shame to leave all this stuff behind. If the eccentric were here now, she would definitely be able to steal it all. Therefore, Han Feng decided to go after her. It was better to keep his weapon on him after all. Suddenly, stones appeared right in front of him, on which there was a handprint, and the stones themselves began to glow with a scarlet light. There was a deafening explosion immediately. If the guy still wanted to get rid of them, Zishi suggested that they see how she could blow him up. The girl asked her sister to see if the boy was dead or not. The stones exploded, and the main character almost shit himself from fear. It's good that he reinforced his clothes, otherwise he would have definitely become a corpse by now. The stones were falling from above, which meant the enemies were now above, so the main character decided to destroy the wall. The three heroes immediately felt themselves starting to fall. The ground began to slip out from under their feet. As soon as the main character had a clear view, he immediately took out his rifle and began to aim. He managed to shoot the white-haired woman in the leg, which gave him a significant advantage in the situation. However, unexpectedly the stranger admitted her defeat. Zishi grabbed the stone, called the protagonist a freak, and screamed at him to let her sister go immediately. Han Feng knew that if he shot this woman, he might not be able to dodge the explosion. And if he shoots the girl first, then this crazy woman will finish him off at that very moment with her shock energy wave. Han Feng demanded that the bombing of his house stop so that they could live in peace. A look of surprise appeared on the white-haired woman's face. Zishi replied guiltily that the explosions gave her pleasure, and that she felt bad without them, so that was why she did it. The woman burst into tears and apologized to the handsome man for this misunderstanding. The heroes moved to the press. This woman was surprisingly calm, even when the bullet was removed from her leg. The heroes promised each other not to cause any more trouble. But Han Feng was still curious to know how they had managed to find him all this time. The woman explained that this was a special skill for working with superpowers that she could teach. Even before climate change, there were people with unusual powers that people now call abilities. They emit something like a magnetic field, and their location can be determined by these fluctuations. Then the heroes talked for a long time and Han Feng roughly understood how to sense fluctuations in other people's abilities. He learned that different types of energy are incompatible, so a person can only have one ability. Judging from this woman's words, it was very surprising that Han Feng had 3 abilities. The protagonist extended his hand and introduced himself. The white-haired woman did the same. Her name is Jiang Ruoqing. Soon the girls were able to find our hero's hiding place. Seeing a familiar face, Jiang Ruoqing immediately rushed to Qiu and indignantly asked why she suddenly disappeared from the institute. It was later revealed that the girls were sisters. True, not relatives but only step-relatives. Jiang Ruoqing even showed a photo of herself being adopted at the age of 11, and Qiu became her sister. After the sister left, the research was successful. But the professor was killed, and the institute itself was destroyed. Now in the city, some powerful people are hunting people with superpowers. If they reveal their identities now, it will be bad. Jiang Ruoqing said that when abilities are overused, energy begins to crystallize in the body. To which Qiu replied quite calmly that she had just recently removed the exact same crystal from Han Feng. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, asking why she hadn't told him about this before. 2 years ago, a girls' institute accidentally discovered a woman with superpowers. Her own powers froze her. Last year, Jiang Ruoqing and her sister also suddenly gained powers, but their sister suddenly disappeared. Earlier this year, the institute succeeded in artificially creating a human with superpowers. But a few months ago, the professor in charge of research in this area was murdered in a women's restroom. Then the institute building itself was blown up, but the 3 heroes managed to escape using their abilities. Han Feng guessed that their abilities might have caught someone's eye, and that's why they wanted to take possession of them. As far as Jiang Ruoqing knew, there was an organization in the city called the Base, which had gathered many people with abilities. A woman with children managed to capture 1 platoon commander. According to him, he was not from the Base, but from the Union organization. ZC added that this captive uncle had once helped an entire neighborhood survive hardships. But then he was captured by people from the Union. Besides, he looked gentle and intelligent, a very pleasant and good-looking person. The question immediately arose as to where such a gentle and intelligent person could come from in the Union. That's why the main character asked to be introduced to this prisoner. Zisai walked up to the cage and told the prisoner that she needed to ask him something. Jiang Shuiyu told the girl that he had already told her everything, so he was now waiting for her to finally let him go. The protagonist approached the camera and mockingly admitted that he hadn't expected the brunette to have already become a platoon commander. Jiang Shuiyu approached Han Feng and explained that back then, he only wanted to get his supplies for the sake of helping people. The protagonist pointed his gun and asked Jiang Shuiyu directly why he was pretending to be a member of the Union. Brent apparently had no intention of answering, so Han Feng slammed his face against the bars and told him he couldn't be fooled. Then he threw the guy away with all his strength. The protagonist pointed the gun again, giving another chance to tell Jiang Shuiyu everything he knows about the Baz group. Shatton replied that he was only at the base for a short time, then the Union captured him, which is why he knows little. The bullet flew right past Jiang Shuiyu's head, grazing his ear. The shot didn't blow his head off only because the protagonist thought the guy could still be useful. If Jiang Shuiyu doesn't tell the truth, he will be of no use anymore. Returning to everyone, the protagonist told everything he learned. Jiang Shuiyu is now a member of the base. This underground warehouse belongs to them. It is said that the base's patrol units are often attacked by the Union, so they are gathering forces to destroy them. Jiang Shuiyu said that the current head of the Union is Li Ziyi. According to this guy, the base now occupies the international airport. They have about 1,000 soldiers. They search the entire city for supplies and residents, secretly processing ugly women and old people into food. However, the girls were not surprised at all. Uncle Li Zhenghao had already told them all this a long time ago. The main character was angry that this bastard didn't tell him anything. In order to prevent the base from destroying the alliance, Han Feng offered to take up arms and help the first organization. The heroes went into the tunnel so that Chukyu could place all the weapons in her space. There was so much of it that Han Feng had to forcefully stuff the last box in because the heroine was already feeling nauseous. Meanwhile, the people from the base surrounded the Union. Brother Zhenghao was nowhere to be found. Li Ziyi reminded him that he had already said that he could not be in charge. The door swung open, and the boss was immediately informed that these bastards had tied their people to the armored personnel carrier as a human shield. The enemy outside immediately ordered to surrender. The soldier reported to the captain that the 4th detachment had not detected the target. The man with the scar on his face accepted the information and ordered the search to continue on the next street. A guy named Zhang Dongshu asked Captain Zhao what they were dragging their feet on. Last time he let an escaped mutant escape, got a scolding from the commander, and now he can't even handle ordinary people. Captain Zhao replied that this was an old city. The buildings were close to each other, and in such conditions the target would not be found quickly. Zhang Dongshu left the military vehicle, wished the captain good luck, and expressed hope that this time the captain would succeed. Soon our heroes arrived at the parking lot of the Happiness Residential Complex. It seems like the main character was here just recently, but it feels like an eternity has passed. QQ asked where they should look for the old man and the others, to which the boy replied that, according to Jiang Shuiyu, they should be in the west. An hour later, the heroes reached the place and saw that soldiers were surrounding Li. If you follow them, you can find the old man. Suddenly, an explosion was heard nearby. Through binoculars, the protagonist noticed Li Ziyi, who personally began to attack the base unit. He took the loudspeaker and shouted at the creatures in the base that they could try to kill him. The man with the scar on his face ordered that these people be killed immediately. No prisoners were to be taken. But suddenly grants began to rain down from the sky, which completely disrupted Captain Zhao's plans. The protagonist laughed merrily and joyfully exclaimed that he finally met the losers again. The bombs began to explode one after another, scattering the bodies of soldiers in different directions. Captain Zhao cursed foully. This mutant clearly wanted to distract them in order to save the alliance, which meant he needed to be caught. The man took the loudspeaker and shouted that if Han Feng defected to their side, he could become the deputy commander. The car began to catch up with a small snow avalanche, not even realizing that there was a child there instead of the main character. Meanwhile, Li Ziyi joyfully threw himself into his brother's arms. Then he introduced his friend to his comrades and told them that he and Han Feng were brothers in arms. The main character didn't come empty-handed. He brought with him huge guns with which to deal with enemies. Han Feng exclaimed that now it was their turn to counterattack. Let the bastards from the base burn in hell. Among Li Ziyi's people, there was one who had previously served as an artilleryman in a military unit. The main character pointed him to the building and told him that that was where the guys from the base were currently located. Li Ziyi asked in surprise why they were there, to which Han Feng replied that he had left something interesting there. The soldiers lost their target in the surrounding area, but they managed to find a pile of fuel and food in the building. Now that everything is in short supply, no matter where these valuable items came from, Captain Zhao could not refuse them. However, suddenly it dawned on him, but it was too late. The protagonist closed one eye, put out his hand and gave permission to open fire. At that very moment, an explosion occurred and flames immediately engulfed the floor where Captain Zhao was located. 10 minutes of shelling and finally the building began to collapse. Our heroes rejoiced. Thanks to this wonderful cannon, they were able to withstand the enemy onslaught and even achieve victory. Everything was fine, of course, but now their location was revealed. So Han Feng said that they needed to escape. However, such a heavy cannon cannot be moved, and Chukyu's amazing abilities cannot be revealed to others. Therefore, Han Feng suggested leaving the cannons and mining everything around so that the enemy would not take their treasure. Once the heroes were safe, Han Feng inquired about the progress of the rescue. Li Zi said that they still don't know where Liu is now. Then the main character asked about the guy with the beard, and the blonde man replied that he and Zheng Hao had acted separately. There was no connection. Han Feng asked them not to worry, as for now they could rest in the Happiness residential complex. He left weapons and supplies in the underground parking lot on purpose, and now the protagonist was going to turn them into equipped fighters. The surviving soldiers pointed out to the captain the place from which the cannons were fired. Miraculously surviving, Captain Zhao asked with a smile how many weapons the soldiers had managed to find. And then the smile turned to rage. The man yelled that he asked to find those bastards, and not some guns. However, it was too late. The wheelchair stepped on a mine. The next moment there was an explosion. Meanwhile, our heroes enjoyed delicious food and relaxed. Soon another team of soldiers arrived at the scene of the explosion. Zhang Dongshu ordered them to take the bodies. Now they need important food. Then he took out his radio and reported to the commander that Zhao's detachment had been ambushed, and that the captain himself had died. The commander cursed foully and handed Zhao's squad over to the guy so that he could now find the key. Then the new commander of the third squad, Zhang Dongshu, went to the temporary headquarters of the third squad. He ordered the fighters not to gather in groups, but to split into threes and thoroughly search the area. The previous commander Zhao always went through fire and water with the soldiers, but this new one only knows how to cool off. Zhang Dongshu was sure that once the people from the Union ran out of food, they would go out to look for food. He had no idea that right now these people were more than full. The boys from the Union approached the main character with a request that he become their elder. Broly said that since the guys already consider him their buddy, Han Feng can now take on the role of the elder. The main character took out some cigarettes and offered the guys a light. Seeing this, Li Zi awkwardly asked for a few packs of cigarettes. The protagonist was speechless as soon as he found out that they had pawned a couple of brothers, and now they needed to be ransomed. Han Feng didn't think that there were places in the city where they even sold living people. Li Zi explained that they were desperate at that moment and could not find any other way out, so they turned in their brothers. But how was my brother so sure that these guys hadn't been gotten rid of yet? However, Li Zi exclaimed, if those bastards dared to kill their guys, they would immediately raze everything to the ground. And then the blonde man explained that the base uses underground tunnels to move troops, and they only control areas where there is a metro. And in those parts of the city where there is no metro or where there are problems with transportation, the soldiers do not go. Li Zi stood up abruptly and offered to ransom the brothers immediately, since with their help they could save Liu. However, suddenly Broly's face changed, and then he lost consciousness and collapsed on the floor. It turned out that the blonde had had a bullet wound for several days, but the guy endured it so as not to let others down. Now that the wound was inflamed, the protagonist decided to try something, so he ordered everyone to leave for a minute. Once there was no one left in the room, Han Feng placed his hand on Li's wound and used green light. However, 10 minutes later there was no result. Han Feng then contacted Nurse Jin via radio and asked how to treat the inflammation after a bullet wound. The girl explained in detail how to treat the wound and what medications were needed. To find medicine, the protagonist decided to go to the underground black market with Chang. On the way, Han Fen asked how far it was to the market, to which the man replied that it wasn't far to go, since the market was located right under the river. As soon as the boys entered, Chang asked his comrades not to be afraid of what they would see there. And immediately after that, Han Feng screamed as a robot appeared out of nowhere next to them and asked for a card. It was strange that this robot waiter's battery hadn't died yet. Meanwhile, Chang placed the card and the robot greeted number 250, asking him to follow him. Along the way, the robot explained that their market does not tolerate any violence. If the rule is broken, otherwise they will open fire. Apparently, there is a very serious organization behind this market. As soon as the heroes entered the room, they immediately saw a huge number of corpses, and immediately smelled the disgusting smell of rot. Inside the room there was a huge number of machine guns. The robot repeated the rules once again. If the client commits any violent acts, they will immediately open fire. Purchases are made via computer. Chang quickly began typing in the 3 names he needed, Gan, Wen, and Kui, into the search engine. Then the main character began to choose all the necessary medications that the head nurse advised him to buy. The order was formed. The heroes had to pay for 17 packs of cigarettes. Han Feng only had 6 packs, so he topped up the rest with 3 tomatoes and 1 banana, and the payment went through. The robot asked the guests to wait a little. The goods will be delivered soon. A couple of minutes later, he returned with all the medicines. And along with him came 3 captives. Chiang immediately impulsively hugged his comrades, glad that everything was okay with them. Leaving this place, the main character decided that he would come here more often. Upon returning, the heroes immediately treated the wounds and provided the necessary assistance to Li Ziyi. The next day, the blonde came to his senses. The 3 rescued people also came to their senses, and it turned out that they were all the oldest members of the Union. Chiang informed Han Feng that he and his brothers had decided to offer him the leadership of the alliance, but the protagonist refused. The guy wasn't a fool. He didn't want to be drawn into a gang and forced to work for them without the right to refuse. 2 days later, Han Feng came to his friend and told him that it was time for him to return. Li Ziyi began to beg his little brother to stay a little longer, since he still hadn't thanked him for saving him. The protagonist gave his friend a walkie-talkie and promised to send him a batch of supplies every month. Thanks to the supplies of the protagonist, Li was elected head of the Union, but that's a completely different story. Now Han Feng and his comrades could return to their villa. On the way home, the boy promised his brother a warm welcome since he had worked so hard these days. Hearing that the guy had a console and a bathtub, Yuan Yi's face changed from indifferent to interested. However, after soberly assessing the situation, the boy decided that it would be best for him to return to the cave. But as soon as the main character entered his villa, he saw that it was completely frozen from the inside. Moreover, due to the lack of heat, the entire garden also died. Now Han Feng remembered that when they left, they thought they would return on the same day, so they didn't turn off the heaters. As a result, they worked for several days without stopping, overheated and failed. In any case, the electricity needs to be restored first. The only problem was that the diesel fuel froze. Although the last time the guy started the generator, there were no such problems. As a result, the main character realized that he would not be able to start the generator, since there was no electricity and the required temperature. This time, Han Feng decided to use the ability, but it needed to be carefully controlled to avoid igniting the oil. It worked, and now the house has electricity, but if the heaters overheat again, the house will freeze again. Han Feng came up with an idea on how to create a reliable heating method once and for all. He asked Yuan Yi if they had steel pipes or something like that. He wanted to make a heating system. QQ appeared nearby and said that, according to her wayward sister, they had a whole warehouse of steel pipes. With the help of the improved ability of the eccentric, they will be able to quickly deliver all the necessary materials. And then the heroine handed a small clot to Yuan Yi and explained that he just needed to put all his things in there, and she would pick it up from the other side. It turns out that shortly after QQ overate, she developed a second spatial window. As a result, the eccentric's plan worked, and the pipes were quickly delivered to the protagonist's villa. First of all, you need to turn off the generator to make it easier to modify it. It's water-cooled, so you can use hot water from the radiator. First, the protagonist connected the radiator outlet to a steel pipe. Hot water will flow through the pipes and circulate throughout the house, causing the interior to become warm. If you soften and bend steel pipes, you get a battery system. After all these manipulations, the main character only had to carry out these improvised batteries everywhere. Then, using a pump the water back into the radiator, heat it up again, and use it in a circle. Han Feng could finally start the generator and heating system. Soon the house became warm, and the heroes even changed into t-shirts and shorts. Now the main character only had to tidy up the garden to get fresh vegetables again. The next day, Han Feng tried using green light to revive the dead vegetables. However, half an hour later he realized that there was no effect. Moreover, the vegetable tasted very sour. Returning to the apartment, the main character asked the eccentric to give him new seeds, since the old vegetables in the basement had rotted. QQ handed over a bag of strawberry seeds and said, "The Eye of Evil says that in addition to vegetables, they also need fruits and berries." Suddenly the main character remembered something important. If you mix beans, meat, and green and red light, you get more meat. Now, if the main character can catch the energy fluctuations, everything will work out. The attempt was successful. The vegetable immediately grew in size, but the taste remained as sour as before. In other words, if you increase the amount of meat, fruits, and vegetables, they will retain their original taste. All that remains is to grow ripe strawberries and increase their size. QQ took out a walkie-talkie and told the protagonist that Sister Jing had already returned, and there was no need to pick her up. She also brought with her a small pet, which turned out to be a real polar bear. The girl explained that she immediately rushed home after leaving Miss Jiang. But on the way, this little boy suddenly ran past. She instinctively struck out, accidentally wounding him. Now the main character understood where the beast got such a wound on its face and why it was so scared now. Be that as it may, the heroes took the bear to themselves. Probably because there was always enough food. After a few days, the bear became completely accustomed to them. Han Feng soon learned that the bear sled was indeed fast. A few days later, our heroes managed to grow strawberries. QQ wanted to show mercy to her relatives, so she sent some berries through the spatial pocket. Jiang Ruoqing asked her sister in surprise if it was really a strawberry. However, they immediately ate all the berries. Suddenly, the door of the room was violently knocked down. A familiar fat man appeared on the threshold, having finally managed to reach the right place.